When my wife's father died, my lazy wife inherited his house and $33 million. Then she kicked me out saying, "Find somewhere else to live or die, I don't care. You're useless now." Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My wife went pale because the will said, "You know what they say about death bringing out the worst in people?" Well, they weren't kidding. When my father-in-law Richard Hayes kicked the bucket last month, I figured it would be one of those somber family moments where everyone comes together, shares memories, and maybe learns to appreciate what they've got. Boy, was I living in fantasy land. Richard had been sick for months, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't mess around. I'd spent countless evenings at his bedside, listening to his stories about building his business empire from scratch, watching old war movies with him when Clarissa was too busy to visit. The man had grit, I'll give him that. Came from nothing and built a fortune that would make most lottery winners weep with envy. $33 million, to be exact, plus that ridiculous mansion in the hills that looked like something out of a Hollywood movie. I thought maybe, just maybe, watching her father waste away would teach my wife Clarissa something about loss. See, I'd been through this dance before when both my parents died in a car crash 5 years ago. That grief nearly destroyed me. The kind of soul-crushing pain that makes you question everything you thought you knew about life. Clarissa had been, well, let's just say supportive isn't the word I'd use. More like mildly inconvenienced by my emotional breakdown. But Richard's death? That was supposed to be different. That was supposed to be her wake-up call about mortality and family and all that heavy stuff that makes people reevaluate their priorities. Instead, it was like Christmas morning for a spoiled brat who just discovered Santa left the entire toy store under the tree. The reading of the will was a joke. Clarissa sat there in her designer black dress, probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, with this smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When the lawyer announced she'd inherited everything, the mansion, the money, the whole damn empire, she didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. Just nodded like she'd been expecting it all along. Which, knowing Clarissa, she probably had been. That's when things got really ugly. Within a week, my sweet, loving wife transformed into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the woman I'd married 7 years ago, the one who used to laugh at my stupid jokes and steal French fries off my plate. In her place was this cold, calculating stranger who looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. The mansion became her kingdom, and I was suddenly the court jester who'd outlived his usefulness. She started making suggestions about how I should find my own path now that she was financially independent. Because apparently, inheriting millions gives you the right to treat your spouse like expired milk. Then came that evening 3 weeks ago. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I was in what used to be our bedroom, folding laundry like some kind of domestic servant, when Clarissa walked in wearing this ice-cold expression that could have frozen hell over. "We need to talk," she said. And brother, those 4 words have never meant anything good in the history of marriage. I looked up from the pile of shirts, trying to read her face. "What's on your mind, babe?" That's when she dropped the nuclear bomb that obliterated what was left of our marriage. "Find somewhere else to live, or die. I don't care. You're useless now." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation. No, it's not you. It's me bullshit. Just pure, unadulterated venom delivered with the emotional warmth of a parking meter. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding one of her silk blouses in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Excuse me. You heard me, Darianne. You're dead weight. I don't need you anymore. I have everything I want now, and you're just in the way." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This was the woman I'd sacrificed everything for. The woman I'd worked 60-hour weeks to support while she found herself through yoga retreats and expensive hobbies. The woman I'd given up my own dreams for, turning down job opportunities and shelving my ambitions because her needs always came first. "Clarissa, what the hell has gotten into you? We're married. We took vows." "Oh, please." She waved her hand dismissively, like she was shooing away an annoying fly. "Those vows were made when I needed you." Things change. I've changed. My circumstances have changed. You haven't. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of her brother-in-law Marcus lurking in the doorway with this satisfied smirk on his face. He'd been hanging around more and more since Richard's death, whispering poison in Clarissa's ear about how she deserved better, how she was meant for bigger things. The guy had always resented that I'd married into the family, like I was some kind of gold digger who'd tricked his way into their precious bloodline. So that's it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 7 years of marriage, and you're throwing me away like garbage? Don't be so dramatic. I'm giving you an out. A fresh start. Consider it a favor. A favor? She thought destroying my life was a favor. That night, while Clarissa was out celebrating her new independence with Marcus and their country club friends, I packed my entire life into 2 beat-up suitcases and a cardboard box full of photos and mementos. 7 years of shared memories, reduced to 3 containers that barely filled the trunk of my old Honda Civic. I took one last look around the mansion that had never really felt like home anyway. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the pristine white furniture that screamed, "Don't touch anything." It was all hers now. The woman who'd once promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, had just proven those words meant absolutely nothing when push came to shove. As I loaded my pathetic belongings into the car, I couldn't help but think about all the compromises I'd made, all the pieces of myself I'd given up to make her happy. The promotion I'd turned down because it would have meant relocating. The friends I'd lost touch with because Clarissa didn't approve of them. The hobbies I'd abandoned because they weren't sophisticated enough for her social circle. And for what? To be discarded the moment I was no longer useful? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty of it all. She didn't even have the decency to pretend it was difficult for her. No tears, no apologies, no acknowledgement of what we'd shared. Just cold, calculated dismissal, like I was an employee being laid off from a job I'd never applied for. As I drove away from that mansion for what I thought would be the last time, I caught a glimpse of Clarissa in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching me leave like she was making sure the garbage truck had properly collected the trash. That image burned itself into my memory. My wife of 7 years, the woman I'd loved more than life itself, making absolutely certain that the man she'd deemed useless was finally out of her perfect new life. I had no idea that in just a few short weeks, that same image would come back to haunt her in ways she never could have imagined. Let me tell you about rock bottom. It smells like industrial-strength disinfectant mixed with the broken dreams of every poor bastard who's ever checked into the Sunset Motor Lodge. And brother, I was now the latest addition to that illustrious club of life's spectacular failures. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect from a joint that charged $39 a night and had a flickering neon sign that only managed to spell out Sue ETMOL on a good day. The parking lot was a graveyard of beat-up cars and questionable life choices, and mine fit right in with the rest of the automotive disasters. The desk clerk, a guy who looked like he'd seen more action than a war correspondent and cared about as much, barely looked up when I stumbled through the door with my 2 suitcases and box of memories. He just slid a key across the counter and grunted something that might have been room 12 or move your car. Honestly, the guy's communication skills weren't exactly Harvard level. Room 12 turned out to be a masterpiece of budget hospitality. The carpet was this charming shade of what the hell happened here, and the wallpaper was peeling like a bad sunburn. The bed looked like it had been through more relationships than a Hollywood starlet, and the bathroom, well, let's just say I've seen crime scenes that were more inviting. But here's the kicker. This dump was paradise compared to the emotional wasteland I was living in. I collapsed onto that saga mattress that probably predated the Clinton administration and just lay there, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like either Jesus or maybe a really sad duck. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sounds of domestic bliss from the adjoining rooms. You know, the kind of bliss that involves a lot of shouting and what sounded like someone getting acquainted with the furniture. That's when Clarissa's parting gift really started to eat at me. Before I'd packed my life into storage containers, she'd tossed me a handful of cash like I was some street performer who'd just butchered a Beatles song. "Here," she'd said, not even looking at me. "This should last you a few weeks until you figure out your next move. $300. 7 years of marriage, and I was worth $300 lousy dollars to her. I'd seen people tip more than that at fancy restaurants. But as I lay there listening to my upstairs neighbor apparently trying out for the Olympic furniture throwing team, something started gnawing at me. It wasn't just the humiliation or the betrayal, though those were doing a fine job of eating me alive from the inside. No, it was something else. Something that didn't add up. See, Richard Hayes wasn't the kind of guy who left things to chance. The man had been a perfectionist in everything. His business, his investments, hell, even the way he organized his sock drawer was like something out of a military handbook. He'd planned every detail of his empire with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, and he'd built it from the ground up through sheer determination and an almost obsessive attention to detail. So why the hell would a guy like that just dump his entire fortune on Clarissa and walk away? I'd spent enough time with Richard over the years to know how he really felt about his daughter. Don't get me wrong. He loved her, but he wasn't blind to her faults. The man had built a business empire through hard work and sacrifice, and Clarissa's biggest accomplishment was mastering the art of spending other people's money with Olympic-level skill. Richard used to joke about it, actually. That girl could burn through a fortune faster than Sherman went through Georgia. He'd say with this mix of affection and exasperation that only a parent could manage. He knew she was entitled, knew she was lazy, knew she had about as much business sense as a goldfish. So would a guy like that really just hand over everything to someone he knew would probably blow it all on designer handbags and European vacations? The more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Richard had always been kind to me. Hell, more than kind. He'd treated me better than his own daughter had in the last few years. We'd bonded over old movies and war stories, and he'd actually listened when I talked about my dreams and ambitions, which was more than I could say for my own wife. There was this one conversation we'd had about 6 months before he got sick. We were sitting in his study, sharing a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he'd looked at me with these serious eyes and said, "Darian, you're a good man. Better than this family deserves, if I'm being honest." At the time, I just figured it was the whiskey talking. But now, lying in this Fleabag motel with nothing but time and regret for company, those words kept echoing in my head. The ceiling fan wheezed and clicked like it was on life support, and I found myself replaying every interaction I'd had with Richard in those final months. The way he'd looked at Clarissa sometimes, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. The comments he'd made about making sure the right people were taken care of. The way he'd always insisted on talking to me privately about important matters. Had I missed something? Had there been signs I was too caught up in my own misery to notice? By 3 a.m, I'd managed to convince myself I was losing it. Grief and desperation were making me see conspiracies where there were none. Clarissa had inherited everything fair and square, and I was just the discarded husband looking for some kind of cosmic justice that didn't exist in the real world. But when dawn finally crawled through those moth-eaten curtains, bringing with it the cheerful sounds of traffic and human misery, I made a decision. Call it curiosity, call it desperation, call it the last pathetic gasps of a man who'd lost everything. I was going to find out the truth. With the few dollars I had left after paying for another night in paradise, I dug out my phone and looked up the number for Charles Whitmore, Richard's longtime attorney. The man had been handling the Hayes family legal affairs for over 20 years, and if anyone knew the real story behind Richard's will, it would be him. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. This was probably going to be the most embarrassing phone call of my life. The pathetic ex-son-in-law fishing for scraps, hoping against hope that maybe there was some kind of mistake, some tiny loophole that might throw me a lifeline. But something deep in my gut told me this wasn't over. Richard Hayes had been too smart, too careful, too damn strategic to leave his life's work in the hands of someone he knew would destroy it. And if I was right, if there was more to this story than Clarissa's triumphant inheritance, then maybe, just maybe, the man she'd called useless was about to prove just how wrong she'd been. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When Charles Whitmore's receptionist finally answered, I took a deep breath and stepped into what I hoped wasn't just another dead end, but the beginning of something that might just change everything. Charles Whitmore's office was the kind of place that screamed old money from every mahogany-paneled surface. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into a different century, where handshake deals actually meant something and lawyers wore 3-piece suits because it was Tuesday, not because they were trying to impress anyone. The receptionist, a silver-haired woman who looked like she'd been guarding the gates of legal wisdom since the Eisenhower administration, informed me that Mr. Whitmore could see me immediately. That should have been my first clue that something was up. In my experience, lawyers don't just drop everything for broke guys who smell like cheap motel soap and desperation. But Charles? He greeted me like I was the prodigal son returning home for Christmas dinner. Darian, my boy. He practically jumped up from behind his massive desk, which was covered in more legal documents than a Supreme Court case. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your wife told me you'd left town. I stopped dead in my tracks. She told you what? Said you'd packed up and moved to, where was it? Arizona? Nevada? Somewhere out west, anyway. Said you wanted a fresh start after Richard's passing and didn't want to be contacted about any legal matters. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. That lying, scheming, backstabbing which had been intercepting my mail, screening my calls, basically erasing me from existence while she played queen of the castle. I should have been furious, but honestly, I was almost impressed by the sheer audacity of it all. Charles, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I've been staying at the Sunset Motor Lodge about 15 minutes from here. I never left town, and I sure as hell never told anyone I didn't want to be contacted. The old lawyer's eyebrows shot up so high they practically disappeared into his hairline. He walked over to a filing cabinet that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast and pulled out a thick manila folder with Richard's name on it. Son, we need to talk. And I mean right now. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, the kind of chair that probably cost more than my car and felt like sitting on a cloud made of butter and good intentions. Charles settled behind his desk with the folder in front of him, looking at me like he was about to deliver news that would either make my day or ruin my life. Darian, what exactly did Clarissa tell you about her father's will? That she inherited everything. The mansion, the money, the whole $33 million empire. Pretty cut and dried, according to her. Charles made a noise that sounded like a cross between a chuckle and a snort. Cut and dried. That's rich. He opened the folder and pulled out what looked like the original will, thick, official-looking papers with more seals and signatures than a peace treaty. Let me ask you something, son. Did you actually see this alleged will? Were you present at the reading? I thought back to that day. Clarissa had come home from the lawyer's office practically glowing with satisfaction, waving some papers around like she'd just won the lottery. But now that I really thought about it, no, I admitted. She said it was family business. That since I wasn't a blood relative, I didn't need to be there. She brought home copies of some documents, but I never saw the actual will. Copies. Charles shook his head like I'd just told him I'd bought the Brooklyn Bridge from a guy in a trench coat. Of course she did. He turned the will around so I could see it, and my heart started pounding like I'd just run a marathon. Even upside down, I could see my name mentioned multiple times throughout the document. Darian, according to Richard's actual last will and testament, the one he signed, witnessed, and notarized in this very office, you are the primary beneficiary of his estate. The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of disbelief. I'm sorry, what? The mansion, 70% of his liquid assets, controlling interest in his business holdings. It's all yours, son. Every last penny of it. I stared at the document like it was written in ancient Sumerian. But Clarissa said. Clarissa was left $10 million, Charles continued, flipping through the pages. A very generous inheritance, mind you. But it came with conditions. What kind of conditions? Charles adjusted his reading glasses and found the relevant section. The bequest to Clarissa Hayes Morrison is contingent upon her treatment of her husband, Darian Morrison, following Richard's death. Should she fail to honor the bonds of marriage and treat her husband with the respect and dignity he deserves, said bequest shall be null and void, and those assets shall revert to the primary beneficiary. My mouth went dry. You're telling me that by throwing me out like yesterday's garbage, she forfeited her entire inheritance? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Charles leaned back in his chair with something that might have been satisfaction dancing in his eyes. Richard was very specific about this clause. He'd watched his daughter's behavior over the years, seen how she treated you, and he wanted to ensure that his money didn't enable her to become an even worse person than she already was. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This is insane. Why didn't she know about this? Oh, but she did. Charles pulled out another document. A receipt showing that Clarissa had been provided with a complete copy of the will 3 days after the funeral. She received the full, unredacted will. She chose to ignore the conditions, probably thinking they were just her father's way of being dramatic from beyond the grave. So she gambled with $10 million and lost. Spectacularly. Charles couldn't hide his grin anymore. Richard always said his daughter was too arrogant for her own good. Turns out he was right. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. The woman who had called me useless, who had thrown me out like I was nothing more than unwanted furniture, had just handed me a fortune through her own cruelty and stupidity. "There's more," Charles said, and I wasn't sure my heart could take any more revelations. "Richard left you a personal message. He recorded it about a week before he died." He pulled out an old-fashioned tape recorder, the kind they probably used during the Nixon administration, and pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, weak from illness but unmistakably determined. "Darian, if you're hearing this, it means my daughter has shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I tried to raise her better, but some people are just born selfish. You've been more of a family to me these past few years than she ever was. Take care of what I've built. Use it wisely. And don't let her guilt you into giving her a damn penny." She made her choice. The recording ended, and I sat there feeling like I'd just been hit by emotional lightning. In the span of 20 minutes, I'd gone from being a discarded husband living in a flea-bag motel to the heir of a multi-million-dollar empire. Charles was watching me carefully, probably wondering if I was going to pass out or start laughing maniacally. Honestly, I was considering both options. "So what happens now?" I finally managed to ask. "Now," Charles smiled like a shark who'd just spotted a school of particularly tasty fish. "Now we make this official. We freeze Clarissa's access to any funds she's already touched, transfer everything into your name, and watch as the woman who called you useless realizes just how spectacularly she's screwed herself." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside my chest. "Charles," I said, "let's get started. You know that feeling when you're about to drop the hammer on someone who absolutely deserves it? That sweet, almost intoxicating moment when karma finally decides to clock in for work after taking the world's longest coffee break? Yeah, that's exactly where I was sitting in Charles Whitmore's office, signing documents that were about to turn my cheating, lying, gold-digging wife's world upside down. "I need you to understand," Charles said, his pen hovering over what looked like enough legal paperwork to choke a horse. "Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. Clarissa will lose access to everything. The accounts, the credit cards, the house, all of it. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" I thought about those 3 weeks in the Sunset Motor Lodge, listening to the sounds of other people's broken dreams through paper-thin walls. I thought about Clarissa's ice-cold eyes when she told me to find somewhere else to live or die. I thought about the casual cruelty with which she'd discarded 7 years of marriage like it was a subscription she didn't want anymore. "Charles," I said, putting pen to paper, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The first domino fell within an hour. Charles had this network of contacts that would make the CIA jealous, and he put every one of them to work. Bank accounts were frozen faster than a Minnesota lake in January. Credit cards were canceled with the efficiency of a Swiss train schedule. The utilities at the mansion, electricity, gas, water, internet, even the fancy security system, were all transferred back into my name by close of business. But the real kicker was Rosa Delgado. Rosa was a private investigator who looked like she could bench press a Buick and had a reputation for finding dirt on people that would make a tabloid journalist weep with envy. Charles had worked with her on dozens of cases over the years, and when he called her about investigating the forged documents Clarissa had been waving around, she was practically salivating over the phone. "Honey," she told me during our brief introduction, "I've seen some grade-A scumbags in my time, but a woman who forges her dead daddies will to screw over her husband? That's a special kind of evil. This is going to be fun." By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Rosa had already uncovered enough evidence to sink Clarissa's little fraud scheme deeper than the Titanic. Turns out my dear wife had paid some 2-bit document forger named Jimmy the font Castellano to create a fake while using letterhead stolen from Charles's office. The guy apparently specialized in fake IDs for college kids, but Clarissa had convinced him to branch out into high-end document fraud for the low price of $50,000. The beautiful irony? She'd paid him with money from Richard's accounts, money that, according to the real will, she never had legal access to in the first place. It was like watching someone rob a bank with a gun they'd stolen from the same bank. While Rosa was busy building a case that would make the DA's office Christmas dreams come true, I decided to take a little drive. After 3 weeks of feeling like the world's biggest loser, I figured it was time to remind myself what winning felt like. I pulled up to the mansion just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The house looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Maybe that's what happens when you realize you actually own something instead of just visiting it. The front door was locked, but Charles had given me the new keys along with a smug little smile that suggested he'd been planning this moment for weeks. I let myself in like I owned the place, which, according to a stack of legal documents, I actually did. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, and I couldn't help but grin. 3 weeks ago, I'd been sneaking around this place like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Now I was home. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Clarissa having a complete and total meltdown in the kitchen. What do you mean the card was declined? That's impossible. I have millions in that account. I followed the sound of her voice, finding her standing next to the granite kitchen island with her phone pressed to her ear and her face red with the kind of fury that usually precedes someone getting slapped with a restraining order. Yes, I'll hold. She snapped at whatever poor customer service representative had drawn the short straw. She was wearing one of her designer outfits, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, but her usual perfect composure was cracking like cheap paint. That's when she noticed me standing in the doorway, and her face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a lightning storm. Darien. Her voice was small, confused, like she was seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? I live here, I said, pulling out the keys and jingling them just to watch her face contort with confusion. Remember? This is my house. Your house? What the hell are you talking about? I inherited. You inherited jack shit, Clarissa. I walked over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it like I owned the place, which I did. Turns out your daddy left you a nice little allowance, but it came with strings attached. Strings you cut the moment you decided I was useless. Her phone was still connected to customer service, and I could hear a tinny voice asking if she was still there. She hung up with the kind of violence usually reserved for fly swatters and tennis rackets. That's impossible. I read the will. Everything was left to me. You read a forgery, sweetheart. A really expensive, really illegal forgery that's about to land you in more trouble than a turkey at Thanksgiving dinner. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. You're lying. Am I? Check your credit cards again. Try to access your bank accounts. Hell, try to turn on the lights when it gets dark. See what happens when the electric company doesn't get paid. As if on cue, her phone started ringing. The caller ID showed her personal banker's name, and she answered it with the kind of desperation you usually see in disaster movies. Richard, thank God you called. There's been some terrible mistake with my accounts. What? Frozen? What do you mean frozen? I watched her face cycle through the 5 stages of grief in fast forward. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a kind of stunned acceptance that suggested her brain was finally catching up to reality. But I'm Richard Hayes's daughter. I inherited. What do you mean I need to speak to my lawyer? She hung up and stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. For the first time since I'd known her, Clarissa was completely, utterly speechless. Here's the thing, babe, I said, savoring every word like fine wine. Your father knew exactly what kind of person you were. He left you $10 million. More money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. But only if you could manage to treat your husband like a human being for 5 minutes. You couldn't even do that. Her phone rang again, then again, and again. Every bank, every credit card company, every financial institution she'd been bleeding dry was suddenly very interested in having a conversation about her account status. I headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. She was still standing there in shock, her phone buzzing with the sound of her entire financial world imploding. Oh, and Clarissa? I said, my hand on the doorknob. You might want to call a lawyer. A good one. Because forgery and fraud are felonies. And I hear orange really isn't your color. As I walked out of what was now officially my house, I could hear her screaming my name behind me. But for the first time in weeks, the sound of Clarissa's voice didn't fill me with dread. It sounded like music. 2 days. That's how long it took for Clarissa's carefully constructed world of luxury and entitlement to come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. And let me tell you, watching it happen was better than Christmas morning, the Super Bowl, and finding $20 in an old jacket pocket all rolled into one beautiful, karma-soaked package. I'd been staying at a decent hotel downtown. Nothing fancy, but a hell of an upgrade from the Sunset Motor Lodge and its symphony of human misery. Charles had advanced me some funds from the estate, enough to get a room with actual hot water and a bed that didn't feel like it was stuffed with broken dreams and regret. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using Clarissa's inheritance money to pay for my temporary accommodations. My phone had been ringing nonstop since the financial apocalypse began. Clarissa, her mother Eleanor, her worthless brother-in-law Marcus, even some of her country club friends. They were all calling with increasingly frantic messages that ranged from confused to desperate to downright threatening. I'd listened to a few of them just for the entertainment value, but mostly I just let them pile up like snow in a blizzard. The best one was from Clarissa herself, left at 2:30 in the morning on day one. Darian, there's some kind of horrible mistake. Daddy left everything to me, not you. You can't seriously believe that senile old lawyer over your own wife. Call me back immediately. We need to fix this before it gets out of hand. By day two, the tone had shifted considerably. Darian, please, you have to stop this insanity. I'm still your wife, for God's sake. Whatever Charles Whitmore told you, it's wrong. Daddy would never do this to me. He loved me. I was his little girl. That one actually made me laugh out loud. Richard's little girl, who couldn't be bothered to visit him during his final months unless she needed something. But I wasn't ready to face her yet. I needed time to process everything, to wrap my head around the fact that I'd gone from motel-dwelling reject to multimillionaire in the span of 48 hours. So I took a little vacation from reality, ordering room service and watching pay-per-view movies while Rosa Delgado and Charles Whitmore systematically dismantled every aspect of Clarissa's fraudulent little empire. Rosa called me with updates that were better than any soap opera. Your wife tried to withdraw cash from 3 different ATMs yesterday, she told me with obvious glee in her voice. When that didn't work, she went into the bank and made such a scene that they had to call security. Apparently, she demanded to speak to the president of the bank and accused them of conspiring against her. Please tell me someone got that on video. Honey, this is the digital age. Everything's on video. I've got enough footage to make a reality show called When Rich Girls Go Broke. Charles had been busy too, filing all the necessary paperwork to make the inheritance transfer official and working with the district attorney's office to build a fraud case against Clarissa that would make Al Capone's tax evasion charges look like a parking ticket. The beautiful thing about your wife, he told me during one of our daily check-ins, is that she's been so arrogant about this whole scheme that she left a paper trail a blind man could follow. She paid the forger with a check, for crying out loud. A check from Richard's account. But by the morning of day 3, I decided it was time to go home. Not to visit, not to negotiate, not to see if we could work things out like some kind of delusional marriage counselor might suggest. I was going home to claim what was rightfully mine and to look my lying, cheating, fraud-committing wife in the eye while I did it. The mansion looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, more like what it actually was, my house. I used my key to walk through the front door like I owned the place, which I did, and found Clarissa exactly where I expected her to be, in the living room, surrounded by empty wine bottles and tissues, looking like the aftermath of a very exclusive natural disaster. She'd clearly been crying for hours, maybe days. Her usually perfect hair looked like she'd been through a blender, her designer makeup was streaked down her face like war paint, and she was wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago, which for Clarissa was like showing up to church in a bikini. When she saw me, she practically launched herself off the couch with the kind of desperate energy you usually see in zombie movies. Darian, thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach you for days. There's been this terrible mistake, and we need to fix it right now before everything gets completely out of control. I stayed by the doorway, keeping a safe distance between myself and the woman who was quickly transforming from ice queen to hot mess. There's no mistake, Clarissa. Everything's working exactly the way it's supposed to. No, she said, shaking her head like she could will reality to change through sheer stubbornness. Daddy left everything to me. I'm his daughter, his blood. You were just married into the family. Just married into the family. I repeated, letting the words hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. Is that what I was to you? Just some outsider who happened to put a ring on your finger? That's not what I meant. But her eyes said otherwise. I meant that, legally speaking, blood relations usually get screwed over by their own greed. I finished for her. Your father knew exactly what kind of person you were, Clarissa. He gave you a choice. Treat your husband with basic human decency and inherit $10 million. Or be the selfish, cruel person you've always been and get nothing. You chose nothing. That's when she tried a different approach. The waterworks kicked into high gear, and suddenly she was the grieving daughter who'd just lost her father and couldn't understand how the world could be so cruel to her. I'm still your wife, she whispered, moving closer with those big, tear-filled eyes that had probably gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old. We took vows, Darian, for better or worse, remember? In sickness and in health. I remember, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recording app. I also remember you telling me to find somewhere else to live or die because I was useless. Would you like to hear it again? I pressed play, and her own voice filled the room with all the warmth and compassion of a glacier. Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care. You're useless now. The sound of her own cruelty playing back to her was like watching someone get slapped by their own reflection. She stood there frozen, listening to herself destroy our marriage with surgical precision. That wasn't. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. You can't judge our entire marriage based on one moment. I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Clarissa, you spent 3 weeks treating me like garbage. You told everyone I'd left town so they wouldn't contact me about legal matters. You forged legal documents and committed fraud. This wasn't one moment. This was who you really are when you thought you held all the cards. That's when I pulled out the recording device Charles had given me, the one with Richard's message. I set it on the coffee table between us like I was placing evidence at a crime scene. Your father left you something else besides that inheritance you threw away? I said, pressing play. Richard's voice filled the room, weak from illness but strong in conviction. Darian, if you're hearing this, it means my daughter has shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I tried to raise her better, but some people are just born selfish. You've been more of a family to me these past few years than she ever was. Clarissa collapsed back onto the couch like someone had cut her strings. The sound of her father's disappointment, his clear preference for me over her, hit her harder than any legal document ever could. He can't have meant that, she whispered. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly enough to set up a will that protected me from exactly what you did to me, I said. He knew you'd show your true colors the moment you thought you had power over me. And you did exactly what he expected. For the first time in our entire marriage, I was the one in control. I was the one with the power, the money, the upper hand. And Clarissa, the woman who had called me useless and thrown me away like garbage, was the one begging. It was the sweetest feeling I'd ever experienced. Just when I thought the circus couldn't get any more entertaining, the ringmaster herself decided to make a grand entrance. Eleanor Hayes, Clarissa's mother and the undisputed queen of looking down her nose at people she considered beneath her social status, showed up at my front door like some kind of well-dressed avenging angel with a Chanel purse and enough jewelry to fund a small country's defense budget. I was in Richard's old study, my study now, going through some of his business files when I heard the commotion downstairs. Actually, commotion might be putting it mildly. It sounded more like someone was trying to stage a hostile takeover of my foyer, complete with shouting, dramatic gestures, and what I could only assume were threats involving expensive lawyers and social ruin. Where is he? Eleanor's voice carried through the mansion like she was addressing the Roman Senate. Where is that opportunistic little weasel who's trying to steal my daughter's birthright? Charming. Always nice to know what your in-laws really think of you. I made my way downstairs to find Eleanor standing in the middle of the living room like she was posing for a portrait entitled Rich Woman Having a Meltdown. She was wearing one of those outfits that screams, I have more money than God, and I want everyone to know it. A designer suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, pearls that looked like they could choke a horse, and enough diamonds to blind a small aircraft. Clarissa was hovering nearby, looking like a scolded child who'd called mommy to fix her problems. Which, let's face it, was exactly what had happened. "Ah, Eleanor," I said, walking into my own living room like I belonged there, which I did. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" She turned to face me with the kind of look that could freeze hell over, her perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression of pure disdain. "You know exactly why I'm here, you little gold-digging parasite." "Parasite?" I laughed, settling into Richard's favorite armchair, my favorite armchair now. That's rich, coming from a woman whose entire family has been living off Richard's money for the past 30 years. Her face went through more color changes than a sunset, but she managed to compose herself with the kind of self-control that only comes from decades of practice at being condescending to people she considers inferior. "Let's skip the pleasantries, shall we?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook that looked like it had seen more action than a war correspondent. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer to resolve this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling fraud now? How very upper class of you." She ignored my comment and started writing out a check with the kind of flourish usually reserved for signing peace treaties. $2 million, she announced, tearing off the check and holding it up like it was the Holy Grail. "More money than you've ever seen in your pathetic little life. Take it, sign whatever papers need to be signed to return my daughter's inheritance, and disappear from our lives forever." I stared at the check, then at Eleanor, then back at the check. The woman was serious. She actually thought she could buy me off like some kind of discount hitman. $2 million, I repeated slowly, like I was savoring each word. "That's your opening offer?" Her eyes lit up with the kind of predatory satisfaction that suggested she thought she'd found my price. "I knew you'd see reason. You always struck me as a practical man, despite your humble origins." "Oh, I am practical," I said, standing up and walking over to her. "Practically insulted that you think I'm stupid enough to trade a $33 million inheritance for pocket change." The confident smile slipped from her face like makeup in a rainstorm. "Excuse me. You heard me. Your daughter forged legal documents to try to steal my inheritance. Your dead husband left me everything because he knew exactly what kind of people his family really were. And now you're trying to bribe me into giving up what's legally mine. The balls on you people are absolutely astronomical." Eleanor's composure cracked like cheap paint. She grabbed the check back and started writing furiously. $5 million, she snapped, practically throwing the new check at me. "That's more than enough to set you up for life. You could buy a nice little house somewhere far away from here and live comfortably for the rest of your miserable existence." I picked up the check, looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then tore it in half. The sound of expensive paper ripping seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. "Lady, you could offer me $50 million and the answer would still be no. This isn't about money. This is about justice. Your daughter treated me like garbage, threw me away like I was nothing, and tried to steal from me using forged documents. Now she gets to live with the consequences." That's when Eleanor's mask finally came off completely. The polite society matron disappeared, replaced by something that looked like it belonged in a nature documentary about apex predators. "You ungrateful little worm," she hissed, her voice dropping to the kind of whisper that usually precedes someone getting shanked in a prison yard. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Richard may have built this empire, but the Hayes family has connections you can't even imagine. We have friends in places that could make your life very, very difficult." "Is that a threat, Eleanor?" "It's a promise." She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something that smelled suspiciously like desperation. "You think you've won because you have some legal documents? Money and power are about more than paperwork, you pathetic little man. They're about influence, connections, the ability to make problems disappear." She paused for dramatic effect, clearly expecting me to start trembling with fear or begging for mercy. Instead, I just stood there looking mildly amused, which seemed to piss her off even more. "Richard built his fortune through some very questionable business practices," she continued, her smile returning with the kind of cold satisfaction that suggested she thought she'd just played her ace. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, payments to people who prefer to remain anonymous. The kind of business dealings that attract attention from federal agencies, if you know what I mean." Now she had my attention. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if the right people started looking into Richard's financial history, they might find some very interesting irregularities. The kind of irregularities that could tie up an estate in legal proceedings for years, maybe decades. The kind that could result in asset forfeiture, criminal investigations, maybe even prison time for anyone foolish enough to benefit from ill-gotten gains. My blood ran cold. Was she talking about money laundering, tax evasion, or something even worse? Of course, Eleanor continued, clearly enjoying the look of concern that must have crossed my face. These are just rumors. Whispers. The kind of thing that would never see the light of day if reasonable people could reach a reasonable agreement. She pulled out her checkbook again, this time writing with slow, deliberate strokes. $10 million, she said, holding up the check like it was a peace treaty. Take the money, sign the papers, walk away clean. Because if you don't, I promise you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you had. I stared at the check, then at Eleanor's smug face, then at Clarissa, who was watching this whole exchange like it was a tennis match where her entire future depended on the outcome. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if Eleanor was telling the truth? What if Richard's empire really was built on something illegal? What if I was about to inherit a fortune that would destroy my life instead of saving it? But as I stood there in that room, surrounded by the wealth and luxury that Richard had built through decades of hard work, I realized something important. Eleanor Hayes was desperate. Desperate people say desperate things, make desperate threats, and desperate promises. And if there's one thing I'd learned from my years of being married into this family, it's that desperate rich people are often the most dangerous kind. Eleanor, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tornado of doubts swirling in my chest. I think it's time for you to leave my house. Her face went white with rage. Your house? This will never be your house, you pathetic. Get out, I said, walking to the front door and holding it open. Now, as she stormed past me, her pearls clicking together like angry castanets, she stopped and turned back one last time. This isn't over, she whispered. Not by a long shot. And as I watched her drive away in her ridiculously expensive car, I couldn't shake the feeling that she might be right. Eleanor's threats echoed in my head like a bad song you can't shake, the kind that plays on repeat until you want to take a sledgehammer to your radio. After she'd stormed out of my house with all the dignity of a pissed-off peacock, I found myself standing in Richard's study, my study, staring at filing cabinets full of business documents that suddenly felt less like treasure chests and more like potential Pandora's boxes. Was I sitting on a fortune built from blood money? Had the man I'd respected, the father-in-law who'd treated me better than his own daughter ever had, been running some kind of criminal enterprise under the cover of legitimate business? The possibility made my stomach churn like a washing machine full of regret and bad decisions. I called Charles first, because if anyone would know about skeletons in Richard's closet, it would be his lawyer of 20 years. Eleanor came to see me today, I told him without preamble. She made some interesting allegations about Richard's business practices, something about offshore accounts and federal agencies. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that usually means someone's either dead or thinking very carefully about what they're going to say next. Darian, Charles said finally, I think we need to meet. In person. And we need to bring Rosa. That didn't sound ominous at all. 2 hours later, we were gathered in Charles's office like some kind of legal war council. Rosa had brought a laptop and enough files to stock a small library, while Charles looked like a man who was about to perform surgery on his own reputation. Before we go any further, Charles began, I need you to understand something. Everything I'm about to tell you is protected by attorney-client privilege, both with Richard and now with you as his heir. But Eleanor isn't entirely wrong. My heart sank faster than the Titanic in an ice storm. So Richard was dirty? Not dirty, Rosa interjected, pulling up what looked like bank records on her laptop. More like creatively accounting for his civic responsibilities. What the hell does that mean? Charles leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples like he was trying to massage away a decades-old headache. It means Richard was very good at finding legal ways to avoid paying taxes. Offshore shell companies, creative consulting contracts, payments to entities that existed primarily on paper. Nothing illegal, mind you, but definitely operating in the gray areas of financial law. Rosa turned her laptop around so I could see the screen. It showed a web of interconnected companies with names like Hayes International Consulting and Meridian Holdings LLC and Apex Strategic Solutions. The kind of generic business names that sound important but don't actually tell you what the hell they do. Your father-in-law was brilliant, she continued. He set up a network of companies that basically allowed him to shuffle money around like a three-card money dealer, always staying just on the right side of legal while minimizing his tax obligations to the point where the IRS probably wanted to send him a thank you card for the creative accounting lessons. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the financial spiderweb Richard had apparently spent decades weaving. So this is all legal? Technically? Yes, Charles said. Ethically questionable? Absolutely. The kind of thing that would attract unwanted attention from federal agencies if someone decided to make noise about it? You bet. That's when it hit me. Eleanor wasn't threatening to expose criminal activity. She was threatening to expose aggressive tax avoidance strategies that, while legal, would tie up Richard's estate in investigations and audits for years. She was trying to make my inheritance so toxic that I'd walk away just to avoid the hassle. So what you're telling me, I said slowly, is that Richard was basically a financial ninja who figured out how to legally screw the government out of tax money, and Eleanor's threatening to rat him out to cause me headaches? In layman's terms? Pretty much, Rosa grinned. Your father-in-law was playing 4D chess, while everyone else was playing checkers. But something still bothered me. If this is all above board, why would Eleanor think it could destroy me? Why would she be so confident that exposing it would get me to back down? Charles and Rosa exchanged a look that made my anxiety spike like a heart monitor in an emergency room. Because, Charles said carefully, there's one more thing you need to know. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others and sealed with enough legal tape to suggest its contents were either extremely important or extremely dangerous. 3 months before Richard died, he came to see me, not about his will, not about his medical condition, but about this. He gestured to the sealed folder. He said he'd been contacted by someone from the Treasury Department, someone asking questions about his business practices. The room suddenly felt about 20 degrees colder. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone had been looking very closely at his financial activities for a very long time, Rosa said. The kind that suggests maybe Richard's creative accounting had finally attracted the wrong kind of attention. But here's the thing, Charles continued, breaking the seal on the folder with the solemnity usually reserved for reading last rites. Richard wasn't worried about the investigation. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. He pulled out a stack of documents that looked official enough to make my palms sweat. Treasury Department letterhead, FBI insignias, the kind of government paperwork that either means you're about to get a medal or about to get arrested. Darian, Charles said, looking me straight in the eye, Richard had been working with federal authorities for over 2 years. Everything you're inheriting, the money, the businesses, all of it, was part of an authorized operation to track down actual money launderers and tax evaders. I felt like someone had just told me that gravity was optional and the sky was actually purple. You're telling me Richard was an undercover agent? Not exactly, Rosa said, taking over the explanation with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she'd been dying to tell this story. More like a very well-compensated informant. The Fed suspected that some of Richard's business associates were using similar shell company setups for actual criminal purposes, drug money, human trafficking, the really nasty stuff. They needed someone on the inside who understood how these financial networks operated. She pulled up another screen on her laptop, this one showing what looked like an organizational chart that would make a conspiracy theorist weep with joy. For 2 years, Richard fed information to the Treasury Department and the FBI about suspicious financial activities in his business circles. Every questionable transaction, every shady deal, every offshore account that smelled fishy, he documented it all and handed it over to the authorities. Charles leaned forward, and for the first time since I'd known him, the old lawyer looked genuinely excited. The beautiful part is that Eleanor has no idea. She thinks she's threatening to expose Richard's crimes. But what she'd actually be exposing is a federal investigation that resulted in the arrests of 15 major financial criminals and the seizure of over $100 million in illegal assets. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that my supposedly crooked father-in-law had actually been Batman in a business suit, fighting financial crime from the inside, while maintaining the perfect cover of a slightly shady businessman. So when Eleanor threatens to expose Richard's dark secrets, I said slowly, she's actually threatening to expose herself as the daughter of a federal informant who helped take down a criminal network? Exactly, Rosa grinned. The woman is basically threatening to shoot herself in the foot with a cannon. But even as relief washed over me like a cool breeze on a hot day, another thought occurred to me. If Richard was working with the feds and Eleanor doesn't know about it, then she's about to walk into a trap of her own making. Charles finished. And we're going to let her. For the first time in days, I smiled. A real, genuine, from the bottom of my soul smile. My father-in-law hadn't just left me a fortune, he'd left me a legacy of justice. And his family was about to learn that some games are rigged from the start. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, sometimes those plans involve wearing a wire to dinner with your lying, scheming ex-wife and her equally crooked mother while federal agents listen in from a van parked outside your house. Not exactly what I'd pictured when I signed up for marriage 7 years ago, but life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you're expecting fastballs. After discovering that Richard had been working with the feds, Charles made a phone call that changed everything. Within 6 hours, I was sitting across from Agent Sylvia Martinez of the FBI, a woman who looked like she could bench press a Buick and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made you want to confess to crimes you'd never even thought about committing. Mr. Morrison, she said, settling into the chair across from me in Charles's office. Your father-in-law was instrumental in helping us build cases against some very dangerous people. His cooperation led to multiple arrests and the seizure of significant criminal assets. So I've been told, I said, still trying to wrap my head around the idea that Richard had been living a double life as some kind of financial superhero. But what does that have to do with me? Agent Martinez smiled, and it was the kind of smile that usually preceded someone having a very bad day. Your wife and mother-in-law are about to make a very big mistake. They're going to try to blackmail you with information about Richard's business dealings, not knowing that everything they think they know about him is exactly what we wanted his criminal associates to believe. She pulled out a small device that looked like something out of a spy movie, the kind of wire that probably cost more than my old car and was about as sophisticated as a NASA satellite. We'd like you to wear this during your next conversation with them. Let them make their threats. Let them try to extort you. Let them dig themselves deeper into a hole they don't even know they're standing in. I stared at the device like it might bite me. You want me to set up my own wife? Mr. Morrison, your wife forged legal documents, committed fraud, and is now attempting to extort money from you using false information about federal investigations. She set herself up. We're just giving her enough rope to hang herself with. Charles leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that suggested he'd been looking forward to this moment for years. Darian, think about it. Clarissa threw you away like garbage when she thought she had all the power. Now she's about to discover what real power looks like. That evening, I was back at the mansion, wearing a wire that felt like it was burning a hole through my chest. The FBI surveillance van was parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck. Agent Martinez and her team were listening to every word through equipment that could probably pick up a whisper from orbit. Right on schedule, Clarissa and Eleanor showed up at my front door like a pair of well-dressed vultures circling a particularly appetizing carcass. They'd clearly coordinated their outfits. Eleanor in her usual armor of pearls and entitlement, Clarissa in a black dress that was probably supposed to make her look grieving and sympathetic, but mostly just made her look like she was attending her own funeral. Darian, Clarissa said as I let them in. Thank you for agreeing to see us. I know things have been difficult between us lately. Difficult, I repeated, leading them into the living room. Is that what we're calling attempted fraud now? Eleanor shot me a look that could have frozen hell over twice. Let's dispense with the hostile theatrics, shall we? We're here to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. They'd brought a briefcase. An actual briefcase, like we were conducting some kind of arms deal in a Cold War spy novel. Eleanor set it on the coffee table with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for signing peace treaties. Inside this case, she announced with all the drama of a game show host, are copies of documents that prove your precious Richard was involved in some very questionable business practices. Money laundering, tax evasion, payments to entities that the IRS would find very, very interesting. She opened the briefcase to reveal stacks of papers that looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know any better. Bank statements, wire transfer records, correspondence with shell companies. It was an impressive collection of evidence that would have been devastating if it weren't exactly what the federal government had wanted Richard's associates to see. These documents, Clarissa chimed in, clearly reading from a script they'd rehearsed, could tie up Daddy's estate in federal investigations for decades. Every penny you think you've inherited could be frozen, seized, or forfeited as the proceeds of criminal activity. I played my part perfectly, letting my face show just enough concern to keep them talking. What exactly are you proposing? A simple trade, Eleanor said, pulling out a contract that looked like it had been drafted by the devil's own legal team. You sign over the estate to Clarissa, we make these documents disappear forever, and everyone walks away clean. And if I refuse? Eleanor's smile was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. Then copies of these documents find their way to the IRS, the FBI, the Treasury Department, and every financial crimes unit on the Eastern Seaboard. Your life becomes a living hell of audits, investigations, and legal fees that would bankrupt a small country. Clarissa leaned forward with the kind of fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. We don't want to hurt you, Darien. We're trying to protect you from something that could destroy your life. Take the settlement, walk away with enough money to live comfortably, and forget this whole nightmare ever happened. How much? I asked, making my voice sound defeated. $5 million, Eleanor said promptly. More than generous for someone in your position. My position? Someone who's about to inherit a criminal empire, Clarissa said, her mask slipping just enough to show the venom underneath. Someone who's too stupid to realize that he's walking into a trap that could land him in federal prison. That was the moment I knew they'd sealed their fate. Extortion, threats, conspiracy to commit fraud. Agent Martinez was probably taking notes faster than a court stenographer on amphetamines. You know what? I said, standing up and walking to the window where I could see the fake cable truck in the distance. I think I need some time to consider your generous offer. Time. Eleanor's voice rose to the kind of pitch usually reserved for dog whistles. You don't have time. Every day you delay increases the risk that someone else discovers what we know. Maybe a week, I said, turning back to face them. Just to get my affairs in order, make sure I understand all the implications. That's when Eleanor lost it completely. The polite society matron vanished, replaced by something that belonged in a nature documentary about predatory reptiles. You listen to me, you ungrateful little parasite, she hissed, standing up so fast she knocked over her chair. We're offering you a way out of this mess, and you're going to take it. Because if you don't, I will personally make sure that your pathetic life becomes a living nightmare. I have friends in the federal government, friends who owe me favors, friends who would be very interested to know about Richard's criminal activities. Criminal activities, I repeated calmly, such as money laundering. Clarissa practically shouted. Tax evasion, conspiracy, fraud. Everything in that briefcase proves that Daddy was a criminal, and you're about to inherit the proceeds of his crimes. That's when the front door burst open like something out of an action movie. Agent Martinez and 3 other federal agents swept into the room with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested they'd done this dance before. FBI, Martinez announced, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. Everyone stay where you are. The look on Eleanor's face was priceless, like she'd just discovered that gravity was optional and she was about to fall upward into space. Clarissa actually screamed, a high-pitched sound that probably scared every dog in a 3-block radius. Eleanor Hayes, Martinez continued, producing handcuffs with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested she really enjoyed her job. You're under arrest for attempted extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Obstruction? Eleanor sputtered as the cuffs clicked into place. What federal investigation? The one your husband was helping us conduct for the past 2 years, Martinez replied with obvious satisfaction. The one that resulted in multiple arrests and significant asset seizures. The one you just tried to blackmail his heir about. Clarissa was next, her cuffs applied while she screamed about lawyers and constitutional rights, and how this was all a terrible mistake. But as they led her toward the door, she turned back to me with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. You set us up, she spat. You betrayed your own wife. I looked her straight in the eye as Agent Martinez read her rights. Clarissa, you tried to erase me from existence. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and then tried to extort me when that didn't work. I didn't betray you. I just let you hang yourself with your own rope. As they loaded my ex-wife and her mother into the back of federal vehicles, I couldn't help but think about that first night in the Sunset Motor Lodge when I'd thought my life was over. Turned out it was just beginning. The federal courthouse looked like something out of a legal drama. All marble columns and imposing architecture designed to make you feel simultaneously awed by the majesty of justice and terrified that you might be on the wrong side of it. I was sitting in Agent Martinez's office 3 days after the arrests, watching her flip through a file thick enough to stop a small caliber bullet while she explained exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Your wife and mother-in-law. She began with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for people who've just solved a particularly difficult crossword puzzle, managed to confess to multiple federal crimes in under 10 minutes. It's actually impressive in its own way, like watching someone set a world record for self-destruction. The recording of that night played on her computer, and hearing Clarissa's voice admitting to forgery and extortion felt surreal, like watching a movie where the villain accidentally confesses to everything while thinking they're being clever. But here's what they didn't know, Martinez continued, pulling out another folder that looked even more official than the last one. What nobody knew, except for me, my direct supervisor, and Richard himself. She opened the folder to reveal photographs, surveillance reports, financial records, and what looked like enough documentation to write a novel about financial crime in America. At the center of it all was Richard's face, looking exactly like the man I'd known, serious, determined, and apparently living the kind of double life that would make James Bond jealous. Darian, your father-in-law wasn't just helping us catch financial criminals. He was the key to dismantling one of the largest money laundering operations on the East Coast. I stared at the photographs showing Richard at various business meetings, restaurants, and what looked like some kind of exclusive club where people wore suits that cost more than most cars. He was undercover? Not exactly undercover. More like a cooperating witness with access. See, about 3 years ago, Richard came to us. Not the other way around. He'd figured out that some of his business associates were using shell companies similar to his own for genuinely criminal purposes. She pulled out a chart that looked like something you'd see in a crime movie. Names connected by red string, photographs of stern-looking men in expensive suits, and financial flows that resembled a spider web designed by someone with a PhD in complexity theory. Marcus Valdez, Tommy the Fish Marconi, Elena Kozlova. These people weren't just avoiding taxes like Richard. They were washing money for drug cartels, human trafficking operations, and arms dealers. We're talking about billions of dollars in criminal proceeds flowing through legitimate-looking businesses. The names meant nothing to me, but the photographs did. I recognized a few faces from Richard's social events. Men who'd seemed perfectly respectable at charity galas and country club dinners. Men who'd shaken my hand and asked about my golf game while apparently running criminal enterprises on the side. Richard could have just walked away, Martinez continued. Could have kept his mouth shut and his hands clean. Instead, he came to us and said he wanted to help bring them down. She pulled out what looked like a personal letter, handwritten on Richard's familiar stationery. He wrote this after his cancer diagnosis, about 6 months before he died. It's part of the case file now, but I think you should read it. I took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. Richard's handwriting was still strong despite his illness, and reading his words felt like having a conversation with a ghost. Agent Martinez, I know I don't have much time left, and there are things I need to make sure you understand. I didn't cooperate with your investigation because I was afraid of going to prison, or because I wanted some kind of deal for myself. I did it because I realized that my pursuit of financial advantage had put me in the same circles as genuinely evil people, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to stop them. Asterisk. I've built a fortune through legal but ethically questionable means. I won't pretend otherwise. But these people, Valdez, Marconi, the others, they profit from human suffering in ways that make my tax avoidance look like jaywalking. If my information can help put them behind bars, then maybe some good can come from the mistakes I've made. Asterisk. I'm leaving everything to Darian because he's the only person in my family who has genuine integrity. My daughter has become everything I hoped she wouldn't: entitled, cruel, and willing to hurt others for personal gain. My wife Eleanor has enabled that behavior for years. But Darian, he's a good man who deserves better than the family he married into. Asterisk. Please make sure he understands that every dollar he inherits is legitimate, not just legally, but morally. The government has verified that all assets in my estate come from lawful sources. He doesn't need to feel guilty about benefiting from my cooperation with your investigation. He's earning it by being the kind of person worthy of inheriting it. Asterisk. Use him well, Agent Martinez. He's stronger than he knows. Asterisk. I set the letter down with tears I didn't realize I'd been holding back. Richard hadn't just left me money, he'd left me vindication. Proof that someone had seen my worth when everyone else, including myself, had written me off as useless. The beautiful irony, Martinez said with a grin that suggested she'd been saving this revelation for last, is that Eleanor's threats were completely backwards. Every criminal activity she thought she could expose Richard for was actually part of an authorized federal operation. Every shell company, every questionable transaction, every offshore account, we knew about it, approved it, and used it to build our case. She pulled out a final document, this one with Department of Justice letterhead and enough official seals to stock a government supply closet. This is a letter of commendation for Richard Hayes, recognizing his contribution to Operation Clearwater, the investigation that led to 17 arrests, the seizure of $347 million in criminal assets, and the disruption of multiple international criminal enterprises. 17 arrests, including some very big fish who are now looking at decades in federal prison. Your father-in-law's information helped us map their entire operation, track their money flows, and gather evidence that will keep them behind bars for the rest of their natural lives. I thought about Clarissa and Eleanor, sitting in federal detention right now, probably still convinced they'd been the victims of some elaborate conspiracy. The irony was delicious. They tried to blackmail me with evidence of Richard's supposed crimes, not realizing they were actually threatening to expose their own ignorance about a federal investigation that had already concluded successfully. So when Eleanor said she had friends in the federal government who would be interested in Richard's activities, she was technically correct. Martinez laughed. We were very interested in his activities. Interested enough to give him a commendation and authorize payment of $2.3 million in consulting fees for his cooperation. My head snapped up. Payment. Cooperating witnesses in financial crimes cases receive compensation for their assistance, especially when that assistance leads to significant asset seizures. Richard earned every penny of that money by risking his life to help us take down some genuinely dangerous people. She pulled out bank records showing the payments, all official and documented, all completely legitimate. So when you inherited Richard's estate, you weren't just inheriting the profits from his business empire. You were inheriting payment for his service to his country. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Richard had accomplished. While his family saw him as a stern businessman who'd gotten lucky, he'd actually been a patriot who'd risked everything to help bring down criminals. There's one more thing, Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more serious. The people Richard helped us arrest, some of them have associates who are still out there. Associates who might not be happy about losing $347 million and seeing their friends go to prison. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying you should be careful. Use security, vary your routines, be aware of your surroundings. Most of these people are smart enough to know that revenge wouldn't bring their money back, but not all criminals are smart. As I left the federal building that day, I realized that Richard hadn't just left me a fortune, he'd left me a legacy. A legacy of justice, of choosing to do the right thing even when it was dangerous, of using whatever advantages you had to make the world a better place. My wife had called me useless. My mother-in-law had called me a parasite. But Richard had called me worthy. And he'd been right all along. 6 months later, the mansion didn't feel like Richard's house anymore. It felt like home. My home. I'd redecorated the place from top to bottom, replacing Eleanor's gaudy taste with something that actually reflected who I was instead of who I was supposed to impress. The library had become my office, filled with plans for my newest project, and Richard's old study was now something I was particularly proud of. The Whitmore Foundation for Family Integrity wasn't just some tax write-off charity. It was my chance to help other people who'd been screwed over by greedy relatives and manipulative spouses. Men and women who'd been discarded like yesterday's garbage when they were no longer useful. People who needed legal help to fight back against family members who thought love was conditional on bank account balances. We'd already helped dozens of cases. Wives whose husbands had hidden assets during divorce proceedings. Adult children whose parents had been manipulated into changing their wills by gold-digging caregivers. People like me, who'd been written off as worthless until they proved otherwise. Clarissa was doing 18 months in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Eleanor got 2 years for the same charges plus obstruction of justice. Their letters arrived every week like clockwork, desperate pleas for forgiveness, promises that they'd changed, explanations about how prison had taught them the error of their ways. I never opened them. The woman who'd called her husband useless was probably sharing a cell with someone who'd appreciate that kind of irony. The mother-in-law who'd thought she could buy her way out of any problem had discovered that federal judges don't accept bribes or take personal checks. Sometimes I'd stand on the balcony where Richard used to watch the sunset, holding a glass of his favorite whiskey and thinking about how much had changed. The scared, broken man who'd packed his life into 2 suitcases was gone, replaced by someone who understood his own worth. Charles had been right about one thing. Sometimes the pawn really does become the king. And this king? This king wasn't interested in ruling through fear or money or manipulation. I was building something better than an empire. I was building a legacy that would have made Richard proud. I showed up to my wife's law school graduation party that I paid for, only for the venue to be closed. I called my wife. She said the party ended 2 hours ago. I guess I didn't want you there. Then I saw my wife's post on her social media, thanking her office lover for sponsoring her education. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, and sold my 90% stake in her new boyfriend's company, $157 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. So there I was, cruising down Fifth Avenue in my Tesla Model S, feeling pretty damn good about myself. Tonight was supposed to be the night. Leah's law school graduation party at that swanky venue in downtown Manhattan that cost me more than most people's annual salary. 48 grand for one night, plus premium everything, because my wife had champagne tastes and zero understanding of budgets. Not that it mattered to me. Hell, I'd have paid double just to see her face light up when she walked into that place. The jazz trio she'd handpicked was probably warming up right about now, and the catering team was likely putting the finishing touches on those ridiculous gold-leafed appetizers she'd insisted on. It's a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, she'd said, batting those gorgeous brown eyes at me. We needed to be perfect, and like the lovesick fool I apparently was, I'd nodded and pulled out my black Amex without hesitation. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Friday evening in Manhattan, which should have been my first red flag. Usually, getting to downtown venues during peak hours is like trying to navigate through molasses while being attacked by angry cab drivers. But tonight, smooth sailing. Almost too smooth, if you catch my drift. I pulled up to the venue and immediately knew something was off. The place was darker than my ex-mother-in-law's soul. No valet, no warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, no sounds of celebration echoing from inside. Just silence and shadows. My gut started doing this annoying little dance it does when things are about to go sideways. I parked and walked up to the main entrance, my Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement like a countdown timer. The doors were locked tight. Not just "we're running late" locked, but "nobody's been here for hours" locked. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands to block out the streetlight glare. Empty. Completely, utterly, soul-crushingly empty. My phone was already in my hand before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. Speed dial number 1, Leah. Straight to voicemail. Her voice, all bright and cheerful. "Hi, you've reached Leah? I'm probably too busy being awesome to answer right now. So leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." Even her voicemail was cocky. I should have seen the warning signs years ago. I tried again. And again. On the 4th attempt, she finally picked up. "Oh, hey babe." Her voice was light, almost musical. There was background noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of sounds you'd expect from a party in full swing. Leah, where are you? I'm at the venue, and it's completely dark. The doors are locked. A pause. Then that laugh. The one I used to think was adorable, but now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, the party ended 2 hours ago. I guess I didn't want you there. The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of what the actual hell. What do you mean you didn't want me there? I paid for the entire thing. I know, and it was beautiful. Everyone had such a wonderful time. The jazz trio was perfect, by the way. Great choice. Her voice was so casual, so matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather or commenting on a nice restaurant meal. Leah, this is insane. You can't just... Click. She hung up on me. Actually hung up. Like I was some telemarketer trying to sell her extended warranty coverage on a car she didn't own. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. Cars were whooshing by. People were walking past with their Friday night plans, and the city was humming along like nothing had happened. But my world had just tilted off its axis. That's when I made my second mistake of the evening. I opened Instagram. There it was, posted just 45 minutes ago. Leah in that champagne gold dress I'd bought her last month from some boutique in Soho that charged more per square inch of fabric than NASA spends on heat shields. She looked absolutely stunning, I'll give her that. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her makeup was flawless, and she was glowing with happiness. She was also kissing Dominic Kane. Dominic fucking Kane. Her senior partner at the law firm, the guy she talked about constantly for months. Oh, Dominic thinks this, and Dominic suggested that, and Dominic is such a brilliant legal mind. I'd started calling him Dominic this, Dominic that in my head months ago, because his name came up in every damn conversation. But here's the real kicker, the caption under the photo. Couldn't have done it without you, my sponsor through law school, Red Heart. My sponsor. My fucking sponsor. I'd paid every penny of her tuition for 3 years. I'd covered her rent, her car payments, her shopping sprees, her girls' trips to Miami and Napa Valley. I'd been her walking ATM for our entire relationship, and she was thanking Dominic for sponsoring her through law school, the guy who'd probably never paid for anything more expensive than her Starbucks order. My grip on the phone tightened until I could hear the case creaking. The blood was rushing in my ears, and for a second I thought I might actually pass out right there on the sidewalk. This wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation served ice cold with a side of public embarrassment. Everyone who mattered to her had been at that party. Her law school friends, her colleagues, probably half the legal community in Manhattan. And they all thought Dominic was her sugar daddy. The comments were already rolling in. Heart eye emojis, congratulations, people tagging their friends to come see the gorgeous couple. One comment made my stomach drop even further. Finally, we were wondering when you two would make it official. You're perfect together. Finally, they've been wondering? How long had this been going on? I scrolled through more photos from the party. There was Leah giving her speech, the speech I'd helped her write, by the way, thanking everyone for their support. There was the cake-cutting ceremony with that ridiculously expensive custom cake I'd ordered from that fancy bakery in Brooklyn. There were group shots of her law school friends, candid photos of the jazz trio playing, pictures of people dancing and laughing and having the time of their lives. At my expense, literally. And in every single photo where couples appeared, there was Leah with Dominic. His arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of some romantic movie about successful young lawyers falling in love over case files and late-night coffee runs. I turned away from the locked venue without another word. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to see. The party was over, in more ways than one. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and burning, but underneath it was something colder, something calculating. Leah thought she was so clever, pulling off this little switcheroo. She thought she could just erase me from her success story and replace me with her new boyfriend like I was some inconvenient footnote in her biography. But here's what my dear wife didn't know, and what was about to become very, very important. I don't just throw money around randomly. Every dollar I spend, every investment I make, every financial decision that affects my life gets documented, tracked, and recorded with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. And Dominic Kane? Well, let's just say that our connection ran a lot deeper than Leah realized. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of red lights and rage-induced tunnel vision. I barely remember navigating through Manhattan traffic, which is saying something, because usually driving in this city requires the focus of a neurosurgeon and the patience of a monk. But tonight, I could have been driving blindfolded through a demolition derby, and I wouldn't have noticed. My building's doorman, Carlos, gave me his usual friendly wave, but I could see the concern creep across his face when he got a good look at me. "Evening, Mr. Thompson. Everything all right? Just peachy, Carlos. Living the dream." My voice came out flat, emotionless. Even I could hear how dead I sounded. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt like it took forever. I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors and almost didn't recognize myself. My usually perfect hair was disheveled from running my hands through it. My tie was crooked, and my eyes had this hollow look that reminded me of those shell-shocked soldiers you see in war documentaries. But as soon as I walked through my front door and saw my apartment, my apartment, the one I'd bought and paid for and decorated according to my own damn taste, something inside me started to solidify. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The place was exactly as I'd left it this morning. Immaculate, organized, and completely under my control. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, where the city lights twinkled like expensive jewelry scattered across black velvet. The modern furniture was all clean lines and quality materials. None of that fussy antique stuff Leah had been pushing for. It would add character, she'd said. Yeah, well, turns out she was the one lacking character. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the good stuff I usually save for closing major deals, and headed straight for my home office. This room was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, my command center. Everything in here was exactly where it should be, arranged with the kind of obsessive precision that had made me successful in the first place. The desk was a thing of beauty, reclaimed walnut from some 19th century barn in Vermont, custom built by a guy in Brooklyn who charged more per square foot than most Manhattan apartments. My laptop sat open in the exact center, flanked by 2 matching monitors and a sound system that cost more than most people's cars. The bookshelf held my collection of business biographies, investment guides, and legal texts that I actually read, unlike some people who just posed with them for Instagram photos. But the real star of the show was sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk, locked away like the precious thing it was, my black leather primary assets binder. I pulled it out and set it on the desk with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. This baby contained 3 years of meticulous record-keeping, every transaction documented with obsessive detail. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, tuition invoices, rent payments, credit card statements, a complete financial autobiography of my relationship with Leah. See, here's the thing about me that Leah never quite understood. I don't do anything halfway. When I love someone, I love them completely, totally, with every fiber of my being. And when I support someone financially, I document every goddamn penny because that's what smart businessmen do. You keep records. You cover your ass. You make sure you can prove exactly what happened if things go sideways. And boy, had things gone sideways tonight. I opened the binder and started flipping through the pages, each one a reminder of just how generous I'd been. Law school tuition, $180,000 over 3 years. Not including books, supplies, and all those study abroad programs she just had to attend. Monthly rent for her apartment in the village, $4,200 for 36 months. Car payments on that BMW she'd claimed was essential for networking, another $800 monthly. Shopping allowances, vacation expenses, restaurant bills that could feed a small village in most countries. The numbers were staggering, even to me. I'd been Leah's personal Bank of America, dispensing cash with the generosity of a drunken lottery winner. And she'd repaid me by making out with her boss at a party I'd funded, then publicly crediting him as her sponsor. But here's where it gets interesting, and where Leah's complete ignorance of my business dealings was about to bite her in her perfectly sculpted ass. About 18 months ago, she'd come to me with this sob story about Dominic. Poor guy was struggling to get his legal consulting firm off the ground. He had big dreams, but no capital. His family had cut him off financially after some falling out over his career choices. He was brilliant, according to Leah, but just needed someone to believe in him. "Baby, you're so good at seeing potential in people," she'd said, curled up next to me on this very couch. "Dominic has this amazing vision for revolutionizing corporate legal services. He just needs someone with your business sense to help make it happen. She'd batted those long eyelashes and given me that smile that used to make my knees weak. Maybe you could meet with him? Just coffee, nothing major. I think you two would really click. So I'd met with Dominic. And you know what? The guy actually was brilliant. His business plan was solid, his market analysis was spot on, and his projections were realistic. Kane Dynamics had real potential to disrupt the traditional corporate law model. The problem was, he needed serious capital to make it happen. Way more than a simple loan or investment from friends and family. That's when I'd made my move. I'd offered to fund Kane Dynamics completely. Full startup capital, operational expenses, office space, employee salaries, marketing budget, the whole 9 yards. In exchange, I wanted 90% ownership of the company. Dominic would retain 10% and serve as CEO, but I would be the majority shareholder with full voting control. It was a fair deal, more than fair, actually. Most venture capitalists would have demanded 95% for that level of investment. But I'd like the guy, and more importantly, I'd wanted to make Leah happy by helping her friend. The paperwork was airtight, drawn up by the best corporate lawyers money could buy. Dominic had signed everything without hesitation, probably because he was so grateful to finally have someone take him seriously. And just like that, I'd become the silent owner of what was now a $157 million company. Kane Dynamics had taken off like a rocket over the past year and a half. They'd landed major contracts with Fortune 500 companies, opened offices in 3 cities, and were being courted by several private equity firms for acquisition. The business press was calling Dominic a legal visionary and a disruptive force in corporate consulting. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except me, Dominic, and our lawyers, was that Dominic Kane was essentially a very well-paid employee of mine. He ran the day-to-day operations, made strategic decisions, and got all the public credit. But at the end of the day, I owned that company lock, stock, and barrel. And now, sitting in my office with that Instagram photo burned into my retinas, I realized I had something much better than hurt feelings. I had leverage. I opened my laptop and navigated to the private equity exchange where Kane Dynamics shares could be traded among qualified investors. The current market value, $174.4 million. My 90% stake, worth approximately $157 million. Give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations. There were already 3 serious acquisition offers pending in my inbox. 2 private equity firms and 1 major consulting conglomerate, all offering premium prices for immediate sale. I could liquidate my entire position tonight if I wanted to. Just click a few buttons and walk away with enough money to buy a small island somewhere. The irony was almost too perfect. Leah thought she was so clever, crediting Dominic as her sponsor in that Instagram post. She had no idea that her precious Dominic was essentially my employee, that his entire success story was built on my investment, that his brilliant legal mind was only able to flourish because I'd given him the financial foundation to do it. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of whiskey. The burn felt good, clarifying. For the first time since I'd seen that locked venue door, I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the hurt, betrayed husband who'd been made a fool of in front of half of Manhattan's legal community, but the calculating businessman who'd built his own fortune by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Leah wanted to play games. She wanted to rewrite history and pretend I'd never existed. She wanted to humiliate me publicly while building her new romance on the foundation I'd provided. Fine. Game on. But this was going to be played by my rules now. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and there's this moment where you could either step back to safety or take the leap into the unknown. That's exactly where I was sitting at 2:47 a.m., staring at my laptop screen with the cursor hovering over buttons that would change everything. The Macallan had done its job. The sharp edges of my anger had smoothed into something much more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. I'd spent the last 4 hours going through every financial connection I had to Leah's perfect little life. And let me tell you, the web was more extensive than a conspiracy theorist's corkboard. But I'm a methodical guy. You don't build a multi-million-dollar portfolio by making rash decisions, even when your cheating wife has just served your dignity on a silver platter to half of Manhattan's legal elite. So I started small, with the arteries that fed her lifestyle before moving on to the major organs. First up, the graduation party vendors. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into my business banking portal. The venue payment? Canceled, with a dispute filed citing services not rendered as agreed. The catering company? Same treatment. The jazz trio she'd handpicked? Their check was getting stopped faster than a teenager trying to use a fake ID at a liquor store. Now, technically, the services had been rendered, just not to me, since I'd apparently been persona non grata at my own wife's celebration. But that's the beautiful thing about contract law. There's always an out if you know where to look. The venue contract specifically stated that the event was for Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's celebration, and since Mr. Thompson hadn't been invited, the terms had been materially breached. I could practically hear the phone calls that would be happening in a few hours. Venue managers scrambling to explain to their bosses why they'd hosted a party without getting paid. Caterers wondering how they were going to explain the bounced check to their suppliers. The jazz trio probably wouldn't even notice until they tried to deposit their payment next week, but when they did, it was going to be a fun conversation. Next on the chopping block, Leah's corporate American Express card. This one was particularly satisfying because I'd set it up as an authorized user account under my primary business credit line. The monthly limit was $15,000, which she routinely maxed out on everything from designer shoes to those ridiculous $200 facials she claimed were essential for professional networking. With a few her Uber account was linked to that card. Her seamless orders, her Amazon Prime shopping sprees, her monthly subscription to that boutique gym in Soho, where she did more socializing than working out. All of it was about to come to a screeching halt the next time she tried to make a purchase. Then came the big one, her final semester tuition reimbursement. Here's something most people don't know about law school financing. A lot of students pay their final semester tuition up front and then apply for various reimbursements and grants after graduation. It's like getting a tax refund, except the check is usually around $35,000, and it comes from the school's financial aid office rather than the IRS. Leah's reimbursement had been processed yesterday. I'd gotten the notification email while I was driving to the party venue. $37,000 for $112, direct deposited into the joint checking account I'd set up for her education expenses. The same account where I was listed as the primary holder. I transferred every penny back to my personal account and then closed the joint account entirely. The transaction history would show exactly what had happened, but by the time Leah figured it out, the money would be long gone and the account would be a memory. But that was all just foreplay. The main event was Kane Dynamics. I pulled up the private equity exchange again and stared at the numbers. The company I'd built, because let's be honest, that's exactly what I'd done, was valued at $174.4 million as of market close. My 90% stake was worth more than some small country's GDP. And sitting in my inbox were 3 acquisition offers that would turn my investment into enough cash to retire tomorrow if I wanted to. The first offer was from Meridian Capital, a Boston-based private equity firm that specialized in legal service acquisitions. They were offering $180 million for a complete buyout, which represented a 3.2% premium over current market value. Not bad, but not spectacular. The second offer came from Goldman Sachs' private wealth division, representing an unnamed client who wanted to acquire Kane Dynamics as part of a larger legal services consolidation play. Their offer was $185 million, plus a potential earn-out clause that could push the total to $200 million if certain performance metrics were met over the next 2 years. But the third offer, that was the one that made me smile for the first time all night. Blackstone Legal Partners, the same firm that had been trying to poach Dominic for the past 6 months, was offering $195 million for an immediate acquisition, with the stipulation that all current management would be retained for a minimum of 2 years. They wanted to buy Kane Dynamics specifically to get Dominic, not realizing that Dominic was essentially just an expensive employee who could be replaced at my whim. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Blackstone was willing to pay nearly $200 million to acquire a company just to get their hands on a guy who was about to find out that his entire career was built on borrowed time and my generosity. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the secure transaction portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my options. I could accept the Blackstone offer and walk away with enough money to never work again. Or I could accept one of the other offers and watch Dominic's world crumble when his new corporate overlords decided they didn't need his services after all. But then I remembered that Instagram photo. Leah's lips on his, her hand on his chest, that caption thanking him for being her sponsor through law school. I remembered the comments from their mutual friends. All those people who thought they'd been watching some beautiful love story unfold when they were actually witnessing the most expensive cuckold arrangement in Manhattan's history. Fuck it. I clicked on the Blackstone offer and hit accept terms. The transaction would take 48 hours to fully process, but my shares were now locked in at $195 million. By Monday morning, I would no longer own Kane Dynamics, and Dominic would be working for people who'd paid a premium price for a company they thought he controlled. The beautiful part was that Dominic would probably never know what hit him. He'd wake up Monday morning thinking he was still the visionary CEO of his successful consulting firm. He'd grab his usual coffee from that pretentious place on the corner, check his stock options portfolio, and probably text Leah some cute message about their bright future together. Instead, he'd walk into his office to find representatives from Blackstone waiting to explain the new corporate structure. They'd be polite about it, professional, but the message would be clear. Kane Dynamics was under new management, and Dominic's role was about to be evaluated for optimal strategic fit. In corporate speak, that translates to, "We paid $195 million for your company because we thought you were indispensable, but now that we own you, we're going to figure out whether you're actually worth keeping around." My laptop chimed with a confirmation email. Transaction accepted. Funds would be available for transfer within 2 business days. I was now $195 million richer, and the company that had made Dominic into Leah's knight in shining armor was about to become someone else's problem. I leaned back in my chair and finished the last of my whiskey. The city lights twinkled outside my window, and for the first time since I'd stood outside that locked venue door, I felt like I was back in control. Phase 1 was complete. The financial arteries that had kept Leah's lifestyle flowing were now severed, and Dominic's professional world was about to be turned upside down. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the real consequences would start hitting, and I had a front row seat to watch it all unfold. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a mason jar. Even in my half-asleep state, I knew exactly what was happening. The chickens were coming home to roost, and apparently they were pissed off about the accommodations. My phone screen looked like Times Square on New Year's Eve, notification after notification lighting up the display. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, even a few WhatsApp messages from numbers I didn't recognize. The digital equivalent of pitchforks and torches, all demanding my immediate attention. I made myself a cup of coffee first, because I'm not a savage. Ethiopian single origin, ground fresh, brewed in my $3,000 espresso machine that Leah had called ridiculously overpriced when I'd bought it. Funny how everything I enjoyed was either overpriced or unnecessary, according to her, but her monthly shopping sprees were essential investments in her professional image. The coffee was perfect, rich, smooth, with just enough caffeine to prepare me for whatever shitstorm was waiting in my inbox. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one with the perfect view of Central Park, and finally checked my phone. 156 missed calls. 156. I hadn't seen numbers like that since the 2008 financial crisis, when half my clients were calling to either panic sell everything or beg me to perform some kind of investment miracle that would save their retirement funds. The text messages were even better. A beautiful cascade of desperation, confusion, and barely contained panic that read like a master class in Actions Have Consequences 101. Leah had sent 47 messages between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. They started out confused. "Babe, my card got declined at the pharmacy. Can you check on that?" Progressed through anger. "This is ridiculous. I need my medications and my card isn't working." And ended up in full-blown panic mode. "Call me back right now. Something is seriously wrong with all my accounts and I need you to fix this immediately." The progression was beautiful to watch. You could practically see the exact moment when she realized this wasn't some computer glitch or banking error. The timestamp on message 32 was 4:47 a.m., probably right around when she called her bank and discovered that her account had been closed by the primary account holder. That would be me, in case anyone was keeping score. Dominic's messages were more professional, but equally frantic. As a lawyer, he at least understood the concept of documentation, so his texts read like evidence for a future court case. Michael, there seems to be an issue with Kane Dynamics operational accounts. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss. Then, 2 hours later, Michael, this is urgent. Our payroll system is showing errors and several vendors are reporting payment issues. We need to resolve this immediately. But the real entertainment was in the voicemails. I grabbed a fresh cup of coffee and settled in for what I knew was going to be better than anything Netflix had to offer. Voicemail number 12 was from the venue coordinator, her voice tight with professional panic. Mr. Thompson, this is Sandra from the Crystal Ballroom. We need to discuss the payment reversal that occurred overnight. Our accounting department is showing a significant discrepancy, and we have vendors asking questions about their payments. Please call me back as soon as possible. Voicemail 23 was from Dominic's CFO, a guy named Bradley who sounded like he'd been chain-smoking since dawn. Mr. Thompson, this is Brad Henley from Kane Dynamics. We've got a serious problem with our operating capital, and Dominic mentioned you might be able to help clarify some banking issues. The board is meeting in emergency session, and we really need to get this sorted out before market open. Emergency session. I loved it. Nothing says your life is about to change dramatically like an emergency board meeting on a Saturday morning. But voicemail 38 was the crown jewel. Leah's voice, completely unhinged. You son of a bitch. I know you're doing this on purpose. You can't just steal my money because your feelings got hurt. I have bills to pay and a life to live, and you don't get to just destroy everything because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. Call me back right fucking now, or I swear to God I'll. The message cut off there, probably because she'd exceeded the time limit. Midlife crisis. That's what she was calling it. Like my perfectly reasonable response to being publicly humiliated and financially cuckolded was some kind of mental health episode that required her patience and understanding. I was on voicemail 45 when the doorbell rang. Carlos must have called up from the lobby, but I'd been too entertained by the digital meltdown to answer my landline. I walked to the front door and checked the peephole, expecting to see Leah standing there with that "we need to talk" expression that had preceded every major argument of our marriage. Instead, it was Maya Torres, Leah's personal assistant. Poor Maya looked like she'd been through a blender set on emotional devastation. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, and she was clutching her phone like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, coffee mug in hand. Maya, this is unexpected. Don't you usually work banker's hours? Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but, she paused, looking around like she was afraid someone might be watching. Can I come in? There's a situation. I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. Maya had always been efficient, professional, and refreshingly honest about Leah's more unreasonable demands. If anyone deserved to be caught in the crossfire of my marital nuclear war, it wasn't her. She followed me into the living room, declining my offer of coffee with a shaky wave of her hand. I don't even know where to start, she said, sinking into the couch like a deflated balloon. Everything's falling apart. Define everything, I said, settling back into my chair with the casual interest of someone watching a nature documentary about predators. The graduation after-party got shut down halfway through last night because the venue's check bounced. People were still dancing when security came in and told everyone they had to leave. Leah was mortified. I mean, absolutely mortified. Some of the partners from her firm were there, and they had to watch her get escorted out by building security. I nodded sympathetically while internally doing a victory dance. That does sound embarrassing. But that's not even the worst part, Maya continued, her voice rising with each word. This morning, Kane Dynamics' payroll system crashed. Completely crashed. Nobody got their direct deposits. The accounting software is showing error messages, and half the staff can't access their company credit cards. Sounds like a technical issue, I said, taking another sip of coffee. Mr. Thompson, Maya said, looking at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to small children. Dominic's board is in emergency session. They're talking about bringing in external auditors. There are rumors flying that the company might be facing some kind of hostile takeover or financial investigation. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite a leap from a payroll glitch. And Leah? Maya's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Leah's losing it. Completely losing it. Her bank accounts are frozen, her credit cards aren't working, and she can't reach you. She's been calling everyone she knows trying to figure out what's happening, but nobody has any answers. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. 17 missed calls from Leah in the past hour alone. She sent me here to find you, Maya said. She's scared, Mr. Thompson. Really scared. She keeps saying that something terrible has happened and that you're the only one who can fix it. I set down my coffee mug and looked at Maya with what I hoped was an expression of mild concern mixed with complete innocence. Well, Maya, that does sound like quite a predicament. So you'll help? The relief in her voice was almost heartbreaking. Help with what exactly? I asked. I'm just a guy who woke up to 156 missed calls on a Saturday morning. Sounds like Leah and her boyfriend are having some business troubles that have nothing to do with me. Maya stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the pieces clicking into place behind her eyes. She was smart enough to recognize the careful neutrality in my tone, experienced enough with wealthy clients to understand when someone was being deliberately obtuse. This isn't a coincidence, is it? She said quietly. Maya, I said, standing up and walking toward the front door. I think you should probably get back to work. Sounds like your boss is going to need all the help she can get today. After Maya left looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to her using interpretive dance, I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled in at my desk. The morning entertainment had been delicious, but now it was time to get down to business. Real business. The kind that required letterhead, legal precision, and the sort of terms that would make corporate lawyers weep with admiration. I pulled out a sheet of my personal stationery, heavy cream paper with my name embossed in dark blue ink, the kind of formal correspondence that screams, "This person means business," before you even read the first word. Some people might call it pretentious. I called it setting the proper tone for negotiations. The funny thing about ultimatums is that most people deliver them wrong. They get emotional, start yelling, make threats they can't back up. But a truly effective ultimatum should read like a business contract, because that's exactly what it is. A contract where one party holds all the cards and the other party gets to choose between accepting terrible terms or facing even worse consequences. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. After 15 years of drafting investment agreements and acquisition terms, I knew exactly how to structure this particular document. 2. Leah Thompson and Dominic Kane. From Michael Thompson. Re. Terms for resolution of current financial disruptions. Date. Today's date. The undersigned acknowledges that recent financial irregularities have created inconveniences for both parties named above. In the interest of resolving these matters expeditiously and avoiding further complications, the following terms are hereby proposed. I pause to admire my opening paragraph. Dry, businesslike, completely devoid of emotional content. Nothing in those sentences even hinted at betrayal, humiliation, or the fact that my wife had been playing tonsil hockey with her boss at a party I'd funded. Just financial irregularities and inconveniences. Like their entire world wasn't currently imploding because I'd decided to stop being their personal ATM. Term 1. Public acknowledgement. Mrs. Leah Thompson shall issue a public statement to be posted across all personal social media platforms and submitted to relevant legal industry publications, acknowledging that her law school education was funded entirely by Michael Thompson. This statement shall specifically name Michael Thompson as the sole financial backer of her legal education and shall correct any previous public statements suggesting alternative sources of funding. The statement shall be substantively identical to the draft provided as Attachment A to this document. I opened a new document and started drafting Attachment A. This was going to be fun. Statement of correction. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank my husband, Michael Thompson, for his complete financial support throughout my law school journey. Michael paid for my tuition, living expenses, and educational costs without any assistance from other parties. My recent social media posts incorrectly suggested that others had sponsored my education, and I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Michael's generous support made my legal career possible, and I am grateful for his investment in my future. Short, sweet, and completely humiliating for someone who'd just spent the last 6 months telling everyone that Dominic was her mentor and inspiration. The legal community loved gossip more than reality TV stars love plastic surgery. So this little correction would be making the rounds at every bar association happy hour for months. Back to the main document. Term 2. Executive resignation. Mr. Dominic Kane shall submit his resignation from all positions at Kane Dynamics, effective immediately upon execution of this agreement. Mr. Kane shall waive any claims to severance, stock options, or other compensation beyond salary earned through his final day of employment. Mr. Kane shall cooperate fully with transition activities as directed by the company's new ownership structure. I allowed myself a small smile at that last bit. Dominic would probably spend hours trying to figure out what new ownership structure meant. By the time he figured it out, he'd be updating his LinkedIn profile with seeking new opportunities in legal consulting. Term 3. Marital asset protection. Mrs. Leah Thompson hereby waives any claims to marital property, business interests, or other assets acquired during the marriage by Michael Thompson. This includes, but is not limited to, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, BU, business equity, and intellectual property. Mrs. Thompson acknowledges that these assets represent Michael Thompson's separate property and shall make no claims for division, support, or compensation related to these holdings. This was the big one. Under New York's equitable distribution laws, Leah could theoretically claim half of everything I'd acquired during our marriage. But that was only if she wanted to drag things through divorce court while I systematically dismantled every financial structure that supported her lifestyle. The smart play was to waive her claims now and avoid the scorched earth litigation that would leave us both poorer and angrier. Term 4. Non-disclosure agreement. Both parties shall execute comprehensive non-disclosure agreements prohibiting public discussion of Michael Thompson's business activities, investment decisions, or personal affairs. This includes, but is not limited to, social media posts, interviews, casual conversations with third parties, and any other forms of public or private communication that reference Michael Thompson in any context. I wanted them both to disappear from my life completely. No more Instagram posts tagging me in couple photos. No more casual mentions at networking events. No more, "Oh, Michael thinks this," or "Michael suggested that," in their professional conversations. They could go build their new life together, but they'd be doing it without using my name as their social currency. Term 5. Enforcement and consequences. Any violation of these terms shall result in immediate legal action seeking full monetary damages, injunctive relief, and complete asset clawback of all funds previously provided to either party. Michael Thompson reserves the right to pursue all available legal remedies, including but not limited to civil litigation, asset forfeiture proceedings, and criminal referrals where applicable. The stick to go with the carrot, in other words, play by my rules, or I'd spend the next 5 years and a significant portion of my considerable wealth making their lives a legal nightmare that would make Dante's Inferno look like a spa vacation. I printed the document on my personal letterhead, then printed a second copy for my records. The terms were harsh but fair, or at least, they were as fair as I was feeling toward a cheating wife and her boyfriend who'd been living off my generosity while planning their romantic future together. The beauty of this approach was its simplicity. Leah and Dominic could sign the papers and move on with their lives, or they could refuse and watch as their current financial catastrophe became a permanent state of affairs. I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just public acknowledgement of reality, professional consequences for Dominic's poor judgment, and legal protection for my own assets. I folded the documents carefully and placed them in a manila envelope along with a cover letter explaining that they had 24 hours to respond. Not to negotiate, not to propose counteroffers, but to respond with either signed agreements or a clear indication that they preferred to handle this matter through alternative means. Alternative means, in this context, being the legal equivalent of a nuclear winter that would leave both of them professionally and financially radioactive for years to come. Maya was probably still somewhere in the building, either hiding in the lobby or pacing around outside, trying to figure out how to report back to Leah without becoming the messenger who gets shot. I called down to Carlos and asked him to find her and have her come back up. She knocked on my door 15 minutes later, looking even more frazzled than when she'd left. "Mr. Thompson?" Carlos said you wanted to see me again. I handed her the envelope. I need you to deliver this to Leah in person. Not by email, not by text, not left with a doorman or assistant. Hand-delivered, with confirmation that she's read and understood the contents. Maya took the envelope like it might explode in her hands. What is it? A solution to her current problems, I said, along with some very reasonable terms for resolving this situation. She has 24 hours to respond. And if she doesn't respond? I smiled the kind of smile that venture capitalists use when explaining to startup founders why their company is being dissolved. Then she'll discover that her current problems were just the opening act. The main show hasn't even started yet. I spent the rest of Saturday doing exactly what I'd been planning to do before my life imploded on Friday night. Absolutely nothing productive. I ordered Thai food from that place on the Upper West Side that charges $40 for pad Thai, but makes it so good you'd sell your grandmother's jewelry to get another order. I binge-watched the entire second season of some Netflix show about billionaires behaving badly, which, given my current circumstances, felt like a documentary about my weekend. Around 7 p.m., I opened a bottle of Burlo that I'd been saving for a special occasion. Originally, I thought that special occasion might be Leah's first big case win, or maybe a romantic anniversary dinner. Turns out the special occasion was celebrating the systematic destruction of my cheating wife's financial security. Life's funny like that. The wine was perfect, rich, complex, with just enough tannins to remind you that good things take time to develop properly. Unlike marriages, apparently, which could go from "till death do us part" to "I guess I didn't want you there" faster than a tech startup burning through venture capital. My phone had been mercifully quiet since Maya left with the envelope. Either Leah was taking her time reading my terms, or she was holed up somewhere having the kind of emotional breakdown that requires multiple boxes of tissues and at least one friend willing to listen to 3 hours of, "But I don't understand how this happened," on repeat. I was halfway through the bottle and contemplating whether to order dessert from that overpriced gelato place when my building's front desk called. "Mr. Thompson? There's a Mrs. Thompson here to see you. Should I send her up?" Of course there was. I'd been wondering when she'd finally work up the courage to face me directly instead of sending her assistant to do reconnaissance missions. "Send her up, Carlos." "Thanks." I didn't bother changing clothes or tidying up the apartment. If Leah wanted to have this conversation, we were going to have it on my terms, in my space, with me holding all the cards. Besides, she'd seen me in sweatpants and a Harvard Business School t-shirt before. Though admittedly, those previous occasions hadn't involved me systematically dismantling her entire financial support structure. The knock on my door came exactly 4 minutes later, just enough time for the elevator ride, and a brief moment of hesitation in the hallway while she worked up her nerve. I opened the door and got my first look at my wife since she'd decided to credit her boyfriend as her law school sponsor. She looked like absolute hell. Her usually perfect hair was hanging loose and unwashed, with the kind of greasy limpness that comes from spending too much time lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The designer makeup she never left the apartment without was completely absent, leaving her face pale and puffy around the eyes. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes. That same champagne gold dress from the Instagram photo, except now it was wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee or wine or possibly tears. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without saying anything. What was there to say? "Welcome to the consequences of your actions. Gee, you look like someone who just discovered that financial security isn't guaranteed. Sometimes silence is more devastating than any clever comeback." She walked into the living room like someone navigating a minefield, glancing around at the apartment she'd lived in for 3 years as if she'd never seen it before. Maybe she was finally noticing that every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every expensive gadget had been bought with my money. Or maybe she was just trying to figure out how to start a conversation with the husband she'd publicly humiliated less than 24 hours ago. "I got your document," she said, sinking onto the couch where she'd cuddled with me countless times while planning our future together. Back when I'd thought our future involved growing old together instead of growing apart via Instagram posts. "I figured you had, considering you're here instead of at Dominic's place." I stayed standing, leaning against the window with my wine glass. Power dynamics matter in negotiations, and I wanted her looking up at me for this conversation. "Michael, I need you to understand something." She was using her lawyer voice, the calm, reasonable tone she'd practiced for closing arguments and client meetings. What happened at the party? It wasn't supposed to hurt you. I nearly choked on my wine. It wasn't supposed to hurt me. You threw a graduation party that I paid for, didn't invite me, made out with your boss in front of everyone we know, and then publicly credited him for funding your education. But somehow this wasn't supposed to hurt me. She paused, running her hands through her unwashed hair. I didn't want you there with my friends. Your friends. I repeated the words like I was trying to understand a foreign language. The same friends who've been eating at restaurants I paid for, drinking wine I bought, celebrating your accomplishments that I funded. It's not like that. Then explain to me what it is like, Leah. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been running a 3-year con where you let me pay for your entire life while you planned your exit strategy with Dominic. She stood up abruptly, pacing toward the kitchen like a caged animal. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Do you know what it's like being the wife who can't afford anything on her own? Having everyone know that my husband pays for everything? So your solution was to pretend that your boyfriend pays for everything instead? He's not my boyfriend. The words came out sharp and defensive. Dominic and I. It's complicated. I laughed, and even I could hear how cold it sounded. Complicated. Right. That's what we're calling it when you stick your tongue down someone's throat at a party and thank them for sponsoring your education. She stopped pacing and turned to face me. I made a mistake, okay? I got caught up in the moment, and I said something stupid on Instagram. But that doesn't mean you get to destroy my entire life. Destroy your life? I set down my wine glass and walked toward her. Leah, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped paying for it. There's a difference. You canceled my credit cards. You closed my bank accounts. She gestured wildly around the apartment. You've turned off everything. I can't even buy groceries. Welcome to adulthood, I said. Most people actually have to earn money before they can spend it. Revolutionary concept, I know. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then she straightened up and the lawyer mask slipped back into place. Those terms you sent me, she said. They're ridiculous. You can't expect me to publicly humiliate myself just because you're having some kind of what? I interrupted. Some kind of reasonable response to being betrayed and humiliated? Some kind of natural reaction to discovering that my wife has been planning her future with another man while I pay all the bills. I never planned anything with Dominic. Really? Because that Instagram post sure made it sound like you two have been quite the team. Couldn't have done it without you, my sponsor through law school. Heart emoji. Pretty clear messaging there, counselor. She was crying now, ugly tears that streaked down her cheeks and dripped onto that champagne gold dress. I felt overshadowed by you. Like I couldn't have any success that was really mine. Like everything I accomplished was just because of your money. And so you decided to give the credit to Dominic instead. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But it did happen like this. I walked back to the window, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like scattered diamonds. You made choices, Leah. You chose not to invite me to your party. You chose to kiss Dominic in front of everyone. You chose to thank him publicly for something I paid for. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. She followed me to the window, standing close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of desperation and regret. Michael, please. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this together. You don't have to burn everything down. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd loved enough to support completely, to invest in totally, to trust with my heart and my wallet. Those terms in the envelope aren't negotiable, Leah. You sign them, or you learn what life looks like when I'm not subsidizing it. And if I sign them, what then? Then you and Dominic can build whatever life you want together. Just not with my money, and not with my name attached to your success story. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I wasn't. The old Michael, the one who'd believed in love and partnership and building a life together, had died somewhere between that locked venue door and that Instagram post. The new Michael was a businessman first, and businessmen don't make deals with people who've already proven they can't be trusted. 24 hours, I said quietly. Sign the papers, or find out what the alternative looks like. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes Manhattan feel like the center of the universe. I chose my outfit carefully, navy Tom Ford suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent, and a tie that whispered, "I own this room," without having to shout about it. Today wasn't just about business. It was about making a statement that would echo through the financial district for months. The Kane Dynamics building on Park Avenue was one of those gleaming glass towers that screamed, "We've made it," to anyone walking by. 47 stories of steel and ambition, with Dominic's company occupying the entire 32nd floor. I'd been here exactly once before, about 6 months ago, when Dominic had insisted on giving me a tour of our expanding empire. Our empire. If he only knew. I walked through the lobby like I owned the place, which, until about 18 hours ago, I basically did. The security guard recognized me and waved me through without the usual visitor badge nonsense. Poor guy probably had no idea that the friendly investor he'd been greeting for the past year and a half had just sold the company out from under everyone's feet. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor gave me time to appreciate the irony of the situation. When I'd first invested in Kane Dynamics, Dominic had been working out of a WeWork space in Brooklyn, sharing a conference room with a startup that made artisanal dog treats and another company that was trying to revolutionize the sock industry. Now he had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that probably cost more per square foot than some people's entire apartments. All thanks to my money. All about to become someone else's problem. The reception area was buzzing with the kind of nervous energy that happens when rumors start flying and nobody knows which way the wind is blowing. I could see clusters of employees having hushed conversations by the coffee machine, and at least 3 people were frantically typing on their phones like they were texting their resumes to headhunters. Mr. Thompson, the receptionist, a young woman named Jessica who'd always been unfailingly polite, looked relieved to see me. "Thank goodness you're here. Mr. Kane has been trying to reach you all weekend." "I'm sure he has," I said, checking my watch. "Is the board meeting still happening?" "Yes, sir. Conference room A. They've been in there since 7 this morning. 7 a.m. on a Monday. That was desperation time. The kind of early meeting that happened when shit had hit the fan and everyone was scrambling to figure out which direction the pieces were flying. I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, passing offices where Kane Dynamics rising stars were probably wondering if they'd still have jobs by lunch. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to attend a board meeting for a company I no longer owned, to discuss problems I created, with people who had no idea I was the source of their current nightmare. The conference room had glass walls, so I could see the meeting in progress before I even opened the door. 7 people around a mahogany table that cost more than most cars, all looking like they'd been hit by a freight train carrying bad news. Financial documents were scattered across the table, laptops were open showing spreadsheets that probably looked like crime scenes, and everyone had that shell-shocked expression that comes with realizing your professional world is imploding in real time. Notably absent, Dominic Kane. I knocked once and opened the door. The conversation stopped immediately, and 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me with the kind of desperate hope usually reserved for disaster movie scenes where the cavalry arrives just in time. "Michael." Brad Henley, the CFO, practically jumped out of his chair. "Thank God you're here. We've been trying to reach you all weekend." "So I heard," I said, taking the empty seat at the head of the table. It was Dominic's usual spot, but since Dominic wasn't here, I figured someone should fill the leadership vacuum. "Where's our fearless CEO?" The board members exchanged glances like they were trying to decide who had to deliver the bad news. Finally, Sarah Chun, the head of operations, cleared her throat. "Dominic's no longer with the company as of this morning." "Resignation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Security escorted him out about an hour ago," Brad said. "He submitted his resignation via email at 6:47 a.m. Very brief, very professional, but he's gone." I nodded like this was surprising news instead of the exact outcome I'd orchestrated. "That's unfortunate timing, given our current challenges." "Michael," Sarah leaned forward, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to know what's happening with the company's financial structure. Our operating accounts have been frozen, payroll is backed up, and we've got vendors calling every 5 minutes asking about bounce payments. And there are rumors," added Marcus Webb, the head of business development, "about some kind of acquisition or hostile takeover. The financial press is sniffing around, asking questions about ownership changes and leadership transitions." I looked around the table at these 7 people who'd helped build Kane Dynamics into a $175 million company. Smart, dedicated professionals who'd worked 60-hour weeks and sacrificed personal time to make Dominic's vision a reality. They deserved better than what was about to happen to them, but unfortunately, they'd been collateral damage. Well, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a folder, I have some news that should clarify the situation. I placed copies of the acquisition documents in front of each board member. The Blackstone Legal Partners logo was prominently displayed at the top of each page, followed by language that was both crystal clear and utterly devastating to everyone in the room. As of market close on Friday, I said, watching their faces as they read, I've sold my majority stake in Kane Dynamics to Blackstone Legal Partners. The sale was completed this morning, and they're now the controlling shareholder of the company. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, profound quiet that happens when a room full of intelligent people realizes that their entire professional universe has just been rewritten without their input or consent. Brad was the first to find his voice. Your majority stake? Michael, you own less than 15% of the company. I smiled the kind of smile that venture capitalists use when explaining to entrepreneurs why their company is being dissolved. Actually, Brad, I owned 90% of Kane Dynamics. Dominic held 10% and served as CEO, but I've been the majority shareholder since day one. Sarah's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. Dominic founded this company. He built it from nothing. Dominic had the vision, I said. I had the capital. 90% of the startup funding, 90% of the operational investment, 90% of the expansion capital, all of it came from my personal portfolio. In exchange, I received 90% ownership. It's all documented in the original incorporation papers, if you'd like to review them. Marcus was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably pulling up the corporate filings that he should have read more carefully 18 months ago. But why? Why would you sell to Blackstone? We're profitable, we're growing, we just landed the Morrison Industries contract. Because, I interrupted, my priorities have changed. I'm divesting from certain business relationships that no longer align with my personal interests. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. These people weren't stupid. They could probably guess that my sudden decision to sell had something to do with the mysterious personnel changes and Dominic's abrupt departure. But they'd never know the full story. They'd never know about the graduation party, the Instagram post, or the fact that their former CEO had been playing house with my wife while I funded his professional dreams. What does this mean for us? Asked Jennifer Walsh, the head of legal affairs, in the kind of voice people use when they already know the answer but hope they're wrong. Blackstone's representatives will be here this afternoon, I said, checking my watch. They'll be conducting individual meetings with all senior staff to assess the current organizational structure and determine optimal strategic alignment going forward. In corporate speak, that translated to, they're going to fire half of you and restructure the rest of the company according to their own vision. They paid a premium for Kane Dynamics because they believed they were acquiring Dominic's leadership and vision, I continued. Now that Dominic's no longer part of the equation, they'll need to reevaluate whether the company still meets their investment criteria. Brad's hands were shaking as he set down the acquisition documents. Michael, this company employs 47 people. Some of them have families, mortgages, kids in college. You can't just. I can, and I did, I said, standing up and closing my briefcase. Blackstone Legal Partners is a reputable firm with extensive experience in corporate restructuring. I'm confident they'll make decisions that are in the best interests of their investment, which was a polite way of saying, not my problem anymore. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face the room full of shell-shocked executives. For what it's worth, you're all talented professionals. I'm sure you'll land on your feet, regardless of what Blackstone decides. Then I left them there to contemplate the smoking crater where their careers used to be. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, watching a 27-year-old coding prodigy explain why her legal tech startup was going to revolutionize how law firms handle research. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was back in the borough where Dominic had started Kane Dynamics, except this time I was looking at something that actually deserved my investment. The space was nothing like Kane Dynamics' polished Park Avenue offices. exposed brick walls, concrete floors, and the kind of industrial lighting that made everything look like a hipster coffee shop. But there was energy here, the kind of focused intensity that happens when smart people are building something they actually believe in, rather than just trying to impress investors and climb corporate ladders. The problem with legal research, Ava Lynn was saying, gesturing toward a wall covered in whiteboards that looked like they'd been attacked by a caffeinated mathematician, is that it's still stuck in the 19th century. Lawyers are paying junior associates $300 an hour to do work that artificial intelligence could handle in minutes. I nodded, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that probably came from some thrift store in Williamsburg. The coffee was terrible, bitter, weak, and served at approximately room temperature, but I was more interested in what Ava was saying than the quality of her beverage service. "Show me the demo," I said. Ava's eyes lit up like someone had just offered her unlimited funding and a lifetime supply of Red Bull. She practically bounced over to her laptop, which was connected to a massive monitor that dominated one wall of the workspace. "Okay, so imagine you're working on a complex merger case," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Traditional research would involve sending 3 junior lawyers to spend 40 hours combing through legal databases, precedent cases, and regulatory filings. They'd bill the client $36,000 for work that mostly involves keyword searches and document review. The screen filled with a clean, intuitive interface that looked nothing like the clunky legal databases I'd seen lawyers struggling with for years. "Now watch this," Ava said, typing in a search query that would have taken those junior lawyers days to properly research. Results appeared instantly. Not just a list of cases and statutes, but an organized, weighted analysis of relevant precedents, complete with confidence ratings and strategic recommendations. The AI had sorted through thousands of documents, identified the most relevant materials, and presented them in a format that actually made sense. "This is impressive," I said, and I meant it. I'd seen plenty of tech demos over the years, most of them promising to revolutionize industries that didn't particularly want to be revolutionized. But this was different. This solved a real problem that cost law firms millions of dollars annually. "We're not trying to replace lawyers," Ava continued, clearly warming to her favorite subject. "We're trying to make them more efficient. Instead of spending weeks on research, they can spend their time on strategy, client relationships, actual legal thinking. The stuff that humans are actually good at." I walked around the workspace, taking in the setup. 6 developers working at standing desks that looked like they'd been assembled from IKEA parts and industrial pipe fittings. A conference area made from a reclaimed door balanced on sawhorses. Whiteboards covered with flowcharts, user interface mockups, and what appeared to be a betting pool about which pizza place delivered fastest to their address. This was what a real startup looked like. Lean, focused, built by people who cared more about solving problems than impressing anyone. It reminded me of my own early days, back when I was trading stocks from a studio apartment and living on ramen noodles and stubborn determination. "What's your current funding situation?" I asked. Ava's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "We've been bootstrapping so far. I had some savings from my previous job at Google, and the team is working for equity until we can afford proper salaries. We've got enough runway for maybe 3 more months. And then..." She shrugged, trying to look casual about the fact that her company was 3 months away from bankruptcy. "Then we either find investors, or we all go back to working for other people's dreams." I pulled out my phone and showed her the research I'd done on her background while riding the subway to Brooklyn. MIT computer science degree, 3 years at Google working on machine learning algorithms, 2 years at a legal tech startup that had been acquired by Thomson Reuters. Her code was elegant, her strategic thinking was sound, and most importantly, she was solving a problem that actually mattered. "Tell me about your team," I said. "Best engineers I've ever worked with," Ava said, gesturing toward the developers who were pretending not to eavesdrop on our conversation. Sarah over there built recommendation engines for Netflix. Marcus worked on fraud detection algorithms for PayPal. Kim was the lead developer on that document analysis platform that LexisNexis bought for $40 million last year. And they're all working for equity. They believe in what we're building. Everyone here could get jobs at Google or Facebook tomorrow, making twice what I'll be able to pay them for the next 2 years. But they're here because they want to build something that matters. That was the difference between this company and Kane Dynamics. Dominic had been building a consulting firm to feed his own ego and impress people at legal industry cocktail parties. Ava was building something that could actually change how an entire profession operated. What do you need to scale? I asked. Realistically, $10 million would let us hire the team we need, build out our infrastructure, and fund operations for the next 18 months. 15 million would be better. We could expand faster, maybe open a West Coast office, start targeting the really big law firms. I walked back to the whiteboard covered with user interface mockups. The design was clean, intuitive, obviously built by people who understood that lawyers didn't have time to learn complicated software just to do basic research. Have you talked to potential customers? Actual law firms. We've got pilot programs running with 3 mid-size firms in Manhattan, Ava said. The feedback has been incredible. Partners are telling us we're saving them 60 to 70% on research costs, and the quality of analysis is actually better than what their junior associates were producing. Show me the numbers. For the next hour, Ava walked me through financial projections, market analysis, and customer acquisition strategies that were surprisingly sophisticated for a company operating out of a converted warehouse. She'd done her homework. More importantly, she understood both the technical challenges and the business realities of what she was trying to build. The legal industry spends $12 billion annually on research and document review, she said, pulling up a slide that showed market size and growth projections. If we can capture even 2% of that market, we're looking at a $250 million business. I closed my laptop and looked around the workspace one more time. 6 brilliant engineers, working for equity and pizza, building something that could legitimately disrupt a multi-billion-dollar industry. It was exactly the kind of investment opportunity I'd been looking for my entire career. Ava, I said, what if I told you I could write you a check for $15 million right now? 45% equity, board seat, full operational control stays with you. Her face went through approximately 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, excitement, suspicion, and finally, cautious optimism. I'd say you're either the best angel investor in New York or you're running some kind of elaborate scam. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had since that night outside the locked venue. No scam, just a guy who knows a good investment when he sees one. I pulled out my checkbook and started writing. $15 million, payable to Lynn Technologies, LLC. The same amount I'd made in profit from selling Kane Dynamics, reinvested into something that actually deserved to succeed. Welcome to the big leagues, I said, handing her the check. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I was building something instead of destroying it. 3 days after writing that check to Ava, I was sitting in a corner booth at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side, watching my soon-to-be ex-wife fidget with her coffee cup like it held the secrets to salvaging her reputation. She'd finally agreed to meet. Probably because her credit cards were still frozen and she needed to eat something that didn't come from a food truck. The cafe was one of those understated places that charged $12 for coffee but didn't feel the need to advertise it with neon signs and Instagram-worthy latte art. Just good coffee, comfortable seating, and the kind of acoustic design that let you have private conversations without the entire room listening in. Perfect for what I had planned. Leah looked better than she had during our last encounter, but not by much. She'd managed to shower and change clothes, but there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her usually confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who'd spent the past week discovering that financial independence wasn't just a catchphrase from women's magazines. You look like you've been sleeping, I said, settling into the booth across from her. Some. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like it was a life preserver. Michael, I've been thinking about your terms. And they're designed to humiliate me. I stirred sugar into my espresso and considered her statement. They're designed to correct the public record. There's a difference. You want me to publicly admit that you funded my entire education while I thanked someone else for it. That's humiliation. That's honesty. I leaned back against the booth's leather upholstery. You made a choice to rewrite history in that Instagram post. Now you get to choose whether to correct it voluntarily or let other people figure out the truth on their own. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cafe's windows at the pedestrians hurrying past on their way to jobs that probably didn't hang in the balance of social media posts and financial revenge schemes. What happened to Dominic? She asked finally. What do you mean? He won't return my calls. His assistant says he's unavailable for the foreseeable future. His LinkedIn profile shows he's seeking new opportunities. What did you do to him? I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She genuinely seemed to believe that Dominic had been some kind of independent success story, a brilliant legal mind who'd built his own empire through talent and determination. The fact that his entire professional existence had been funded by her husband was apparently news to her. I didn't do anything to Dominic, I said. I simply stopped doing things for him. That's cryptic even for you. Kane Dynamics was my company, Leah. 90% ownership, fully documented, completely legal. Dominic was essentially a very well-paid employee who got to play CEO because I liked his business plan. The coffee mug slipped from her hands, clattering against the saucer. That's impossible. The incorporation papers are public record. You're a lawyer. You know how to look these things up. But he built that company from nothing. He was working 18-hour days, making all the strategic decisions, landing all the major clients. With my money, I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank transfer records that I'd printed out for exactly this conversation. 18 months of operational funding, startup capital, expansion loans, office leases. All of it came from my investment portfolio. She stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Why would you fund his company? Because my wife asked me to help her friend who was struggling to get his legal consulting firm off the ground. Remember that conversation? You said he was brilliant, but just needed someone to believe in him. The color drained from her face as the pieces clicked into place. Oh God. So when you thanked him for sponsoring your education, you were essentially thanking him for spending my money on your tuition while I spent my money on his business. It's like a financial Russian nesting doll of irony. Michael, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because you never asked. You just assumed that your brilliant boyfriend had built his own empire, and you were happy to let everyone think he was your sugar daddy instead of me. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if she was crying or just trying to process the magnitude of how badly she'd miscalculated the situation. The public statement, I said, pulling a printed draft from my briefcase. Let's go through it together and make sure we get the wording right. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. You're really going to make me do this. You're going to do this because it's the truth. And because the alternative is watching me spend the next 5 years proving in court that you committed fraud by misrepresenting the source of your educational funding to potential employers and professional contacts. I slid the draft across the table. Read it out loud. I want to make sure it sounds natural. She picked up the paper with hands that were visibly shaking. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank my husband, Michael Thompson, for his complete financial support throughout my law school journey. Michael paid for my tuition, living expenses, and educational costs without any assistance from other parties. My recent social media posts incorrectly suggested that others had sponsored my education, and I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Michael's generous support made my legal career possible, and I am grateful for his investment in my future. Too formal, I said. It sounds like a hostage video. Try again, but make it sound like something you'd actually write. She looked at me like I'd asked her to recite the phone book in Mandarin. How do you want me to make this sound natural? I'm publicly admitting that I lied about who paid for my law school education. You're publicly correcting an error. There's a difference. For the next hour, we went through the statement line by line, adjusting the language until it sounded like something a person might actually post on social media rather than something dictated by a divorce attorney. The final version was shorter, more conversational, but still contained all the key admissions I needed on the record. When does this go live? She asked. Tonight. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you're going to email it to the legal industry publications that covered your graduation. Law Journal, American Lawyer, Legal Times, all of them. This is Legal Times, all of them. This is going to destroy my reputation. Your reputation was built on a lie. I'm just giving you the chance to correct it before someone else does the research and figures it out themselves. She folded the statement and put it in her purse like she was handling toxic waste. And after this, after I humiliate myself publicly and admit that my successful boyfriend was actually just spending my husband's money. After this, you and Dominic get to build whatever life you want together. Just not with my funding and not with my name attached to your success stories. She stood up to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I really didn't mean for things to happen this way. I know, I said, but they did happen this way, and now we all get to live with the consequences. She walked out of the cafe without looking back, probably heading home to spend the rest of the day figuring out how to explain to her friends and colleagues why she was about to publicly contradict everything she'd told them about her relationship with Dominic. I ordered another espresso and checked my phone. Ava had sent me a text with photos from their office. The team celebrating their new funding with champagne that probably cost less than Leah's usual lunch. Real celebration, from people who'd actually earned something worth celebrating. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Manhattan's legal community would know the real story behind Leah Thompson's law school education. And for the first time in weeks, I was looking forward to reading the comments. 6 months later, I was standing in the sunlight streaming through the windows of my new apartment on the Upper West Side, drinking coffee that didn't cost $12 and feeling genuinely content for the first time in years. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and absolutely zero marble countertops or designer bullshit that screamed, "Look how much money I have." Just a normal place where a normal person might actually want to live. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Quick, clean, and exactly according to the terms I'd outlined in that envelope Maya had delivered what felt like a lifetime ago. Leah had signed everything without attempting to negotiate, probably because her lawyer had explained in very small words what would happen if she tried to fight a guy who documented every financial transaction with the obsessive precision of a Swiss accountant. She'd moved to Portland, of all places, working for some nonprofit legal aid clinic that helped low-income families with housing disputes. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd gone from Manhattan corporate law to helping people who actually couldn't afford lawyers. Maybe getting her financial reality check had given her some perspective on what real problems looked like. She'd sent me a letter last month, handwritten, not typed, which was somehow more personal than anything she'd done in the last year of our marriage. "I finally understand the difference between prestige and worth," she'd written. "I'm sorry it took losing everything to figure that out." I'd folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Not as a keepsake, exactly, but as closure. Proof that the woman I'd married was still in there somewhere, underneath all the Instagram captions and professional networking bullshit. Dominic had landed on his feet, sort of. He was working for a mid-tier firm in Chicago, handling corporate compliance cases that probably bored him to tears after running his own company. His LinkedIn profile listed him as senior associate, which was corporate speak for former CEO who's now back to being someone else's employee. The legal press had moved on to other stories, but his name still occasionally came up as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rapid corporate expansion without proper financial backing. My phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "Just closed the Morrison Industries deal. $2.3 million annual contract. Drinks at 6. I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. My treat." Lynn Technologies had become exactly what I'd hoped it would be when I'd written that check in the Brooklyn warehouse. They'd landed 12 major clients, opened offices in Boston and San Francisco, and were being courted by venture capital firms who wanted to lead their Series B funding round. Ava had been featured on the cover of Legal Tech magazine as one of the industry's 30 under 30 disruptors, and unlike certain other people I could mention, she'd actually earned the recognition. I spent my days now doing things that actually mattered. Guest lectures at Columbia Law School about the intersection of technology and legal practice. Mentoring other startups that were trying to solve real problems instead of just chasing valuations. Serving on the board of Lynn Technologies and watching brilliant people build something that would outlast all of us. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city going about its business. No designer furniture that cost more than cars. No art collections that existed solely to impress dinner party guests. No evidence of the life I'd built with someone who'd never really wanted to build anything with me at all. Just sunlight, good coffee, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'd won. Not because I'd destroyed Leah's financial security or ended Dominic's CEO career or forced them both to confront the reality of their choices. I'd won because I'd freed myself from a relationship that was built on transactions instead of trust, from supporting people who saw my money as an entitlement rather than a gift. I'd won because I was finally investing in things that deserved to succeed, working with people who wanted to build rather than just consume, living a life that belonged to me instead of performing in someone else's social media fantasy. My phone rang. Ava again. Change of plans, she said. The whole team wants to celebrate the Morrison deal. We're thinking that new rooftop place in Brooklyn. You in? I looked around my normal apartment with its normal furniture and its complete absence of Instagram-worthy moments, and realized I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather be than celebrating with people who'd actually earned their success. I'm in, I said. See you there. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, leaving behind the sunlight and the quiet and the satisfaction of a well-executed victory. Time to go celebrate with people who understood the difference between building something real and just looking successful online. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was over when I stood outside that locked venue door. Turns out it was just beginning.